have Dr. Zhao with us this morning. Matter of fact, I think we've been really fortunate this week to have Mike Fullen, Matt Spathis, and now Yong Zhao. I did not know Dr. Zhao. I had never met him before now. I feel like I've met him because Alan November had a conference that you must have been one of the speakers at, and so there's a video on Alan November's website, and I've watched that a couple of times. But as you can see up here, Dr. Zhao is a university distinguished professor. He's at Michigan State. He's well known in the research community. He publishes in our major journals in the American Educational Research Association. He won the Young Early Career Award, the Cattell Award. It's a very prestigious award of the American Educational Research Association. His work, it's kind of interesting to look at his writings and look at his interests and how they have changed somewhat over the years, but he's connected all of those interests. And his interests are in international and comparative education, globalization in education, computer-assisted language learning, the teacher adoption of technology, and the diffusion of innovation. He does an enormous amount of traveling, I believe. He's speaking at many different conferences around the world, doing a lot of work with principals. So I think that we are very fortunate to have Dr. Zhao with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Paula, for having me here. It's nice to be in San Diego. It's always nice, right? It's amazing that you guys can get work done here. I seriously, one of the reasons I resist moving to California is that I won't get any job done. So I have to stay in Michigan in the miserable weather. You can only thing you can do is work, right? But thank you for having me here. It's truly a pleasure to work with school leaders and teachers. And as you know, we've been talking a lot about educational change and transformation. I think you've heard a lot about those things. And my research is really not around leadership or how to make schools more effective or efficient. And so I think you've heard a lot from Michael and a lot of from leadership development to how do you make your teaching better, how do you make your schools better. My question actually of recent years has really about make your schools better in doing what? So that's really actually a question asked, because in our lives, we think there's a lot of things children should learn, and we like them to learn everything, but it's not possible. So I kept asking the question, what knowledge is of worth? What is worth teaching? Why do we teach certain things? Should we challenge that or not? And so actually this has led to a book which is going to be released by ASCD. That is my reflection on education in the U.S. It's called Catching Up or Leading the Way, American Education in the Age of Globalization. That is also the main topic of today as well. So what I'm going to do is to go through some of the ideas about what today's American reform, education reform is about, and why some of the ideas are quite misleading, and why some of the things won't work. So if you're an ASCD member, you should receive a copy of the book. If you're not, you can get some of the fish. I like their design. It's like a lot of fish. The fish tank, it's more like a modern art. And it doesn't look like a serious book, but it is very serious. So I want to start with the general quote is that everyone in K-12 education is very aware of No Child Left Behind. Actually, it is this piece of law that prompted me to write this book about this catching up thing. Until No Child Left Behind, I never believed any reform policy would make a difference in schools. I never believed it, because you track on the history, most education reform trends, policies do not translate into classroom practices. And recently, actually, Larry Cuban still wrote a book called Hug in the Middle. It's about talking about most teachers don't change. Then we talk change, but they don't change. But No Child Left Behind has delivered massive changes in school behaviors, in teacher behaviors, in student behaviors, which becomes very worrisome to me. That's why I actually wrote this book. But in a No Child Left Behind is really talking about the reason No Child Left Behind passed with bipartisan support was there is a perceived gap between American students and students in other countries, and between the minority students, and white majority are suburban kids. That's the gap they're trying to close. And the same thing goes on, actually, even in 2008, the National Governors Association and the Chief State School Officers Organization in the US has also begun to talk about how do we close the gap between American students with students in other countries like Finland, Singapore, Korea. That's what they're talking about today, international benchmarking. And they want to have not only national standards, but international standards. You have heard actually recently about the NGA, the National Governors Association, which is endorsed by Arne Duncan, about national standards and possibly voluntary national assessments. And which actually I was quite to my surprise. I did not realize Obama would follow this road of nationalizing this process. But indeed, that's what's happening. And if you look at this document, it came out last year, at end of the last year, 2008, talking about why national standards or international standards are important. Why do we have to revise and raise our standards for every student and be in the same area? But you should also pay attention to say that a lot of the standards they're talking about, either practically or idealistically right now, is in really 3 domains, is literacy or language arts, math, and science. That's what they're talking about right now. And the same thing with Obama's 2009 talk a lot about how our children are in competition with children from India and China, and how our children will lose out because they did not have global standards in education. So you can see there's a huge concern about this achievement gap, the gap between our students and the students in other countries. I bet all of you have heard about this many, many times, right? So this achievement gap that keeps worrying us, and it's prompting, it's driving a lot of our educational reform efforts, especially around accountability. You heard about teacher merit pay recently. You heard about standardization, raise standards of all those things. But I grew up in China. I taught in China. I was a student in China for many, many years before I came here about 20 years ago. So I have been reflecting around this gap. In our life, we have all kinds of gaps, right? And some gaps matter and some gaps don't. So one gap I've had is about drinking. It's, growing up in China, I did not grow kind of drinking beer a lot. We did not have beer. We had some other things to drink. So when I arrived at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where I was doing my PhD study, and I realized there was a gap in how much I can drink versus my friends who grew up in the Midwest. And so this is how much I could do in a minute. I tried very hard. It's about 1. And most of my friends, actually, they really could finish 3. So you can see this gap has been bothering me for the past 2 decades. I've been trying to close this gap. And this gap is indeed an achievement gap. How much you can achieve in a minute versus how many others can achieve in a minute. But does this gap really matter in life? Did it matter? Well, maybe not matter in the US, but it actually matters in China, how much you can drink. Seriously, you can get a job. It's a different culture. So some knowledge, some abilities may matter more in one culture and in other cultures. So when we talk about this gap in the US, the gap has existed, has been talked about for a long time. This is not the first time you heard of this gap. 1958, a year after 1957, which is very simple math, right? That's when after the Soviet launched the Sputnik, the satellite, and the US was in a panic, saying that the Soviets now have better technology, especially military technology, than the US. So the US was in big trouble. And as you know, through all history, whenever a society is in trouble, who we blame, right? We blame back to education, especially public education. So we did not have enough missiles at that time compared to Soviets. We thought our education was in deep trouble. Actually, the economic crisis right now, eventually it's going to be blamed back on education. You don't believe it yet, right? Now we're still blaming the bankers. But coming back to say, where did the bankers come from? Come from schools, right? You did not teach those bankers to be responsible. Therefore, we have the problem. So that's going to happen. It's eventually. Actually, I'm not joking about this. The chief state school officers already talk about teaching financial literacy in schools. So it's coming back. But anyway, so back to 1958. So when there was a perceived missile gap, which JFK actually used to defeat Nixon in the election. However, actually that missile gap was wrong. It's misinformation. The U.S. had more missiles than the Soviets. But anyway, so coming to this idea is that people start to find evidence to say how there is an academic gap between American students and the Soviet students. This cover story of the Life magazine in 1958 well documented that, showing two high school students, one in Moscow, one in Chicago, how their lives are different. Their lives in schools were different. In that, Stephen, the Chicago kid, was spending time playing, socializing, hanging out with friends, doing sports, while his counterpart in Soviet Union, Alexei, was spending time doing chemistry, physics, experiments in school labs, which again documents clearly that there was academic gap. So there's a gap. The gap showing that how Americans were not as good as the Soviet counterparts. Then the same stories kept going on. 1983, Ronald Reagan. I don't know how many of you here are old enough to remember this. This A Nation at Risk. A Nation at Risk. Last year was the 25th anniversary of this, and you heard a lot more about A Nation at Risk. A Nation at Risk, this time was in response to Japan, not necessarily to Soviets. And to Japan, because Japan started growing out of ashes of the World War II, and actually at the same time, Germany and South Korea started to take over products, most automobiles, steel and chemical industry. This report came out to be very, very significant. As you can see, it made some very strong judgment. It says that our nation is challenged. And the problem, again, goes back to school, public education. You can say in red, I quote this, "We are raising a new generation of Americans that is scientifically and technologically illiterate." So if you are in high school, you're supposed to be technologically illiterate. So I don't know how many of you, you don't have to admit that. But this report serves as the beginning of today's educational reform strategies. It called for higher standards, called for more accountability, called for differential pay for teacher performance. It's called for a lot of things, which later on pushed for the standards-based reform in the U.S. for the past 2 decades as well. But again, it's based on this idea of fear of the coming up of other nations and how U.S. may lose. So the gap talk is there. And the gap talk continues. In 1995, this is the first time, actually, TIMSS made out and to show how American students are not testing as well in mathematics and science compared to others. TIMSS, I don't know how many of you know about TIMSS, but this was called the third International Mathematics and Science Study. Now today it's still called TIMSS, but the T has changed into trends, not third anymore. I think it made so much sense at that time they did not want to change the name, so it's still called TIMSS. It still goes on. It's an international study. As you can see here, the U.S. ranked in the middle, actually way below the average in terms of test scores in math and science, especially after 8th grade and to 12th grade. So it shows you some more academic gaps. This time, our attention was turned to Singapore. Singapore seems to be the country that always score high in TIMSS. And after Singapore, you can go to South Korea, you go to Hong Kong, and go to Taiwan. Most of the East Asian countries, actually Japan as well, seem to score high. This again is cited as evidence of the declining of American students' academic performance. 2007, this one is actually getting It's a forced kind of cycle around back to 1958. This time, the format is almost the same as the 1958 Life magazine story. But this time, they're using a movie. How many of you seen this documentary called 2 Minutes? 2 people? Okay. It's good. The others don't need to see it. It's because it's really bad. But anyway, the documentary was made by Robert Compton. He's a venture capitalist. And the idea was trying to show how students in India, China, and the US are spending their time. 2 minutes is roughly the 4 years of high school. And Compton says how our kids spend the 2 minutes would determine the future of our students and the future of our nation. No surprise, as the film will show you, the 2 students from Carmel High School in Indiana spend way too much time playing video games, hanging out with friends, doing sports. It's actually Neil and Brittany. One of them is at Indiana University, one is at Purdue now. They're doing fine. And versus 2 schools, 2 kids from Shanghai, China, and they were doing a lot of math, doing a lot of science, doing a lot of core academic things, spend their time, and 2 students from Bangalore, I think India, high school students. It's showing again there's a big gap. Compton actually one time we had a face-to-face debate, and as well as actually a written debate about this film. And I was invited, and he was invited by Indiana University in, I think, September 2008. 2008. We had a debate on the campus. And of course, he lost. He didn't win the debate. Otherwise, he would be standing here, but I'm here. So he did not. It was funny in terms of trying to talk to him, to point out all the obvious problems of this film, of his view. And one problem since 1983, A Nation at Risk, is education decisions now is more determined by business people. Because 1983, A Nation at Risk justified to connect it very well between our economic development and education. Therefore, business should have a say in education affairs. So that's why any business can come to say something without knowing what education is about, and people will think that's important. After you have AT&T, you have Microsoft, all they say you're saying something. But anyway, Compton over there, what reminded me was something, how simplistic this kind of documentary is. So he said at a debate that the reason he made this film was during a visit he had to some Indian kindergartens in 2005. And he said when he walked into the classroom, asked these Indian kids, 5, 6-year-old, what they would like to be when they grow up. And their students, one after another, answered they want to become a surgeon, a doctor, a scientist, all kinds of great aspirations of jobs. He said, therefore, but his daughter did not have that aspiration. He said, now we must lose. We got to document something. There must be a gap here. Then I had to think, actually I told him and told the audience as well, I have 2 children. One is 17, 18 now, one is 11. I remember my daughter, the 11-year-old, when she was 5, we parents always asked what they would like to be. Her aspiration was, she said she wanted to be an elephant when she grows up. And my son, actually, who is going to attend the University of Chicago studying economics, when he was 5, 6, he wanted to be a truck driver. So I was thinking, in this process, what counts as good evidence, as good data to think is different. But eventually, anyway, what Compton, this kind of gap documentation has going on for half a century now. So if you believe any of this data, America by now should have been run down to the ground. We should have been taken over by all other countries. If this gap mattered, so maybe this gap was simply just like my beer drinking gap didn't really mean much. Now if you look at, however, the other data, you may see something different. I have not updated this report yet. This is from the World Economic Forum. They produce this Global Competitiveness Index every year. If you look as a nation, the US remains the most competitive country competitive means have the capacity to grow than any other places. This is the 2007, 2008 data. The 2009 report shows the same thing. At the same time, if you look at the US, a recent RAND Corporation study showed America remains the most innovative country in terms of science and technology. America retains still the country that has the most patents, the most innovations, most intellectual properties created here. So you want to keep wondering, if any of these predictions were true in 1958, the Soviets should have taken over, but no, actually, to these kids, some of you are so young, you probably don't even know there was a USSR, right? You don't even, it doesn't exist anymore, right? Japan actually has been in trouble for a long time. It's been declining, all those places. And many other, the India and China, they're nowhere near to the US. I go to China every month. I'm from China. I know a lot of this. So how do you explain this difference, this big number of patents? You look at the US, goes up very high. And also, you see a rise in the application of patents in China. But most of the patents are filed by foreign companies, or some of the patents are not in, there are two categories of patents. One category is application, basic improvement of design. One is we call product patents. That means you come up with a new line of products, which is very different. So we we'll come back to ask the why question. So maybe the gap did not matter. Now we have to go back to look for some other data. There's a guy, a researcher, did some study about the correlation between test scores of FIMS, the first international mathematics study, and other indicators of the health of a society. So this study was conducted. This is the grandfather of TIMSS, by the way. So this is FIMS, first international mathematics study. That was done in 1964, about over 40 years ago now. So if anything mattered, those kids would have become the primary workforce for each country. So they would have made a difference. In 1964, 13-year-olds, I don't see anybody who could have been 13-year-old in 1964. But if anyone sat here, you did put the nation to shame, because the US scored second to last in terms of test scores. US, I'm sorry about that. It's so US, well, you're bad in math, in this test, right? That take full responsibility. So as you can see, it's participating countries. But as you know, we would argue the ultimate purpose of education is not test scores. I hope you would agree, right? The reason we have education is that to produce better test scores so we can beat other countries. What other indicators would matter as a society? The author of this study, Keith Baker, took Thomas Jefferson seriously. He said, well, to assess the health of a country, to assess whether a country is doing well, we should look at other indicators. Other indicators would be life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That means how wealthy are you in the country? How fast do you grow? Do you enjoy enough freedom? Are you happy in general? So Keith Baker took some other data. He said, let's look at the other indicator. 40 years later, did those test scores matter? Did you truly, should we blame you, or should we just thank you for that? He said the first number data we look at is wealth, using GDP. And this is his conclusion. The higher a nation's test score 40 years ago, the worse its economic performance. So well, thank you for not scoring well. We should be to thank you very much. But now don't go back to tell your school board, say, let's drop our test scores so our economic and performance go better. This basically shows what I call this ecological fallacy. It doesn't really matter gap. So now if you don't believe wealth, you believe how about growth? Rate of growth. How fast did the economy grow over the past 40 years? Is the rate of economic growth for nations improved as test scores dropped? This is another interesting piece of data, right? If you go on to say about productivity, there's no correlation. No relation between individual productivity and the test score. So whether you're scoring high in math or low in math on this indicator did not really matter. Quality of life, negative correlation. That means the higher your test score, the quality of life was lower. Actually, it kind of makes sense, right? If you were going to math camps every summer, every day, you can imagine the quality of life, right? It's kind of, you have to be thinking about this kind of issues, right? And this, my daughter thinks the quality of life drops if she keeps going to math camps. But she's going to the music camp, now she thinks that's high quality life. And so that's fine, you know. And if we go on to democracy, almost the same issue. I think actually makes sense too, because if you think about who controls education, you know, one problem I have with the current education reform in the US is that we're not now in democracy. We'll become a very, you know, nationalistic approach. You know, we're letting the government, a few people in Washington D.C. to decide what's knowledge, what's useful knowledge, when your child should learn it, how they should learn it, and how much they should learn it. You know, that's kind of against our general principle of the US, right? Livability. 6 of 9 countries that scored higher are worse places to live. Creativity. Again, it's the same story, but I just want to read the study. Read this. It's from Kaplan. It's one of the first actually studies I truly found try to run this kind of correlations. He actually also ran correlations between team scores and other indicators as well. It's very interesting to see it. So what this does not really show that math is bad for you. Okay, don't take that as math is not necessarily bad for you, but test scores in mathematics as a single indicator does not show the gap in education. So achievement gap we're talking about is simply gaps in test scores on a limited number of subjects. That's all it is. So let's take gaps as what it is. It's basically gaps in test scores on a limited number of subjects. But now we are taking those gaps at a national level as if that's the gap in education quality. Now we are trying to use that indicator to judge the success of a student, the success of a teacher, and the success of a school. Use a single criteria. It actually would be something dramatically different. So that's why you come down to the idea about Einstein. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. This is a very nice way. I work with a lot of psychometricians at Michigan State University. I have a big group of them, like Bill Schmidt was this big head of TIMSS. We are good friends, but we debate all the time. Actually, Bill Schmidt and I have very interesting debate about this. Some of those psychometricians believe if it cannot be measured, it doesn't exist. It's very interesting. So in this, I got some of the most important heart scientists, Einstein, to say, no, there's something that may not be measured. However, I tried to find when Einstein said this. I can't find a when, but everybody says, believe he said this. So let's believe it. Well, on the internet, actually, if you look for things like this, anything that's smart can be said that can be attributed to Einstein. If you said Einstein said this, you can never be wrong. Anything that sounds kind of confusing and philosophical, you can say that's a Chinese proverb or Confucius said that. You can always be right. Nobody will question you. But we also have other people talking about how schooling are different from education. We all have to actually remember this as educators. Education is beyond what we think we can measure. It's beyond subjects. It also has to come to the question about what knowledge is of most worth. So there's so many things to learn. Schools can only teach so little things. I go back to 1959. So we have always challenged what's worth teaching in schools. Herbert Spencer, a British philosopher, asked the question to say, okay, so there's so many things we can teach, but what's worth teaching? In 1959, that's right toward the end of the Industrial Revolution, the British society was going through a major transformation from agriculture to industrial. At that time, schools, not many of them actually, most don't go to schools. Schools that prepares the elite class, the gentlemen, the noble class, most of them were teaching the subjects of Latin, Greek, grammar, and religion, the Bible. I don't think at that time anyone would be able to challenge the usefulness of Latin and Greek. Like today, nobody challenges, we think numeracy and literacy is so important. Nobody questions that. That's why schools, as educators, teachers, I think you're never asked to question whether what you're teaching is useful. You're only asked to teach it well. And at that time, if Britain was doing AYP, they would be measuring scores in Greek and Latin, right? But it didn't matter. So Spencer said, if we judge the knowledge, the value of knowledge in terms of these 5 categories of human activities, is it useful? To, for example, to help you administer to self-preservation. That means to be healthy, to be safe. And does Latin help you to be healthy and safe? I don't think so. And then how does it about secure necessaries of life? How about be a good parent? How about be a good community member? And also spend your leisure time. After a very interesting essay, the title is called What Knowledge of Most Worth. You can find it essay actually online in Project Gutenberg. Read it. It's very interesting. And he says, no, none of those. What matters, what's of most value is science. Science as physiology, physics, chemistry, biology. And actually, that was almost the beginning of the massive introduction of modern sciences into modern curriculum. And we've been doing that for the past 150 years. This is actually the NEA did the same thing. The NEA followed a lot of Spencer's argument. The National Education Association is called the cardinal principles of secondary education. That's why we need to learn all of this kind of things, but most of them has to talk about modern sciences. Now it's been 150 years. We have to continuously evaluate when things change. New knowledge becomes more valuable, or some old knowledge may be rendered useless. Things begin to change. Now in the 21st century, what are the factors that's changing us? Traditionally, we have been really teaching students to live in a local and a physical environment. In a world that's bounded by geographical boundaries and by physicality. That is, we were worried about San Diego. We're worried about California, the US. That's very local. We teach local economics. We teach local history. We teach about local laws and local culture rules. We also teach about the physical. That is something that's tangible, that's touchable. That's something we can move, we can touch. That's why we teach the natural environment as the physical part of it. But now in the 21st century, in this I see the emergence of 2 new words. One is the global, that is not local anymore. And another one is the virtual. The rise of the virtual environment, that's not necessarily tangible. I'll explain how these 2 might affect us. Let's go to the global. What is the global? We talk about globalization a lot. Globalization, most of us think about, we think in terms of its consequence. That is outsourcing of jobs. That is the influx of goods from other countries. That's the influx of people from other countries, migration, tourism. But the fundamental process that drives globalization is something that's much simpler. It's what we call the shrinking of distance. That's because of technological changes and political changes. It's easier to cover the same distance as before. Just as an example, this is the first voyage of Christopher Columbus from Spain to the Bahamas. And it took him and his people 3 months to cover this distance. And today, how long do you think? With fly, what for? Well, depends on which airline you take. So if you get on Expedia, I Googled, and American Airlines flies there. With a layover in Miami, and you get coffee with delays, it's about 13 hours. Now that makes a huge difference in terms of what you can do, what you can think about. I just got back from Singapore yesterday. I left for Singapore on Sunday. I was there, make a presentation. I didn't even have 1 day of walking, and I came back yesterday here. So I can do that. But if it took me 3 months to give a talk to Singapore, I would never do it. But I would do it in 13, 20 hours. I can take care of that. And the other thing has to do with the speed of communication. This was the first telegram message sent across the Atlantic Ocean. Think of such important technology innovation, laid the cable across the Atlantic. Then they tried this first message. The message was this. It's really interesting. Why this is a message like this? But it's fun. That's 1858. It took them 17 hours to send these words across. 17 hours. Today, if you want to send this message across, how long do you think it would take? It depends on how fast you type, right? I mean, if you type really slowly, I think it can take about a minute. Now imagine what can you do, the difference. 17 hours, how many of you would you be texting to your friends in England if it take 17 hours to type these words? You wouldn't do it, right? And now you would do it. Also, money matters too. How much money does it take to cross distance? A 3-minute phone call from New York to London in 1927, when it's first made available by AT&T as commercial phone calls, would cost $65. That's about $1,000 today. Would you make the phone call very often? You're not going to do business that way, right? Today, how much does it cost? Do you use Skype? If you use Skype, you can connect to the USD guest network, and sometimes it doesn't really work. When it works, at least, right? When it works, it's free, or it's maybe 2 cents if you buy a card. Now, that is very significant. This is what we call a death of distance. A death of distance has not been completely erased. But it's possible. It's much, much easier to cross. Now, this coupled with the collapse of the Soviet Union, with the opening up of China, suddenly you have many, many more people being able to communicate, integrate. So as the death of distance, but before the death of distance, before distance died, our society was so dramatically different. We're separated for thousands of years, or tens of thousands of years. Therefore, different society developed different economy, culture, language, and social systems. We were different. Just to show you how different we are, this is the distribution of population. It's a different types of map. Okay, it's not your typical geographical map. You look at how big China is there. China, the green one. India is the orange, yellow. And you see Africa is quite big. So over there, because this is population. Now, if you use population as a base, and then in contrast to wealth distribution, you can see Africa shrinks to almost nothing. There's no money there, right? And you look at Australia over there, it's very small in terms of population. If we were mapping based on the population of rabbits, Australia would grow really big, but we're not. So, but money gets very bigger, right? Japan gets wealthier, India gets not, but Europe gets really big. Now, if you look at, in terms of educational resources, tertiary education, it almost corresponds to the idea of wealth. The U.S. gets bigger. Now, if we map based on another set of indicators, this is royalties and license fees, exports. And U.S. is really big, right? When I show this map in Europe, people will say, oh, they thought I was making fun of Americans, how heavy we are. I said, no, it's not. I told them it's not. It's nothing to do with body mass. It's royalties and license fees. Well, this is knowledge. U.S. exports the most knowledge to other countries. How different we are, right? Look, other countries don't exist on this map. Now, if you look at the other one, toy exports. That's China. China versus the U.S. Now, what does it mean? It means societies are very different. Some countries have money. Some countries have people. Some countries develop with more knowledge. Some countries are more in manual labor. It's very diverse. Because of this diversity and because of death of distance, Now people can take advantage of these gaps. The first thing that has happened is what we call, by the way, if you like the map, okay, if you like this map, there's a lot of maps that you shows different ways of viewing the world. It's just fascinating. Have you taken this down? It's very quick. Okay. If you want the PowerPoint, I'll be happy to send you the PowerPoint as well. But because of these gaps and because of the depth of distance, the first thing it's enabled is something people call global supply chain. Businesses begin to start to fragment the production process and locate them globally. For example, when you design a car, you can now have a designer located in one place because text and message doesn't cost much and it's instant. Then you can have the production team in another place. Then you can have another production in another place. So they can move fast. The cost is small. So it's impossible now. As an example, Dell computer. This is the global supply chain of Dell computers a few years ago. Dell was based in Texas, Austin. It's having, Mexico was making keyboards for Dell computers. France was making sound cards, the ones that make sound. Hong Kong was making video cards and microprocessors. Malaysia was making floppy drives. That's what this is, old technology, old map. And China was making power supplies. Singapore, disk devices. Taiwan, cooling fans and monitors. And Japan, CD-ROM drives. So Dell computers can do this because they can take advantage of the diversity and the depth of distance. The same thing goes, for example, the Mini Cooper. This is from National Geographic. It was really interesting. It takes the globe. It's a big job to make the Mini. That's the title of the article. It's kind of interesting playing with the words. It's a British brand owned by a German company, manufactured in 14 different countries. Now, how does this relate to education and knowledge? It basically means, number one, businesses have to locate the production globally to take advantage of the difference in terms of price and talents. Outsourcing has become a fact. People are sending jobs to different places. So the first thing about globalization affecting all of us as educators to think is, what knowledge, what jobs will be sent to other places? It's futile to try to convince the business to keep jobs home. Michigan tried to do that, and we are not very happy about it. Our governors, especially now our Democratic governor, Jennifer Granholm, has basically made Michigan kind of a horrible place to live. Because they try to say, let's hold on to our jobs. Let's keep into the unions, not trying to reinvent ourselves. But the jobs cannot be kept home. It's impossible. You have to reinvent. Actually, our new strategy with Jennifer Granholm is we're going to become our next Hollywood. Michigan is going to be into the movie industry. But Michigan still has not learned this yet. Recently, the Michigan legislators are debating a bill, which I think is should make it into one of the American funniest government video, that home video. The bill is called Hire Michigan First. Seriously, hire Michigan first. That is, they said, okay, any job, any business want to offer a job, we should consider Michigan residents first. This is now in the 21st century, they're trying to pass a law like that. And how possible that is, it's very silly. But Michigan is thinking about those things. They try to hold on to jobs to help Michigan residents. But most Michigan residents are becoming Washington residents and moving to Seattle now, actually. It's not 50% of Michigan's college graduates leave the state. But anyway, so this is one side of the story. Businesses are located in different places. And this place, like the map about China, the toy industry, those jobs may be shifted to Vietnam very quickly, maybe to Africa very quickly, depending on the situation. So it's very fluid in terms of the types of jobs to have. The flip side of this is people move. There is a global trade and global competition for talents, for abilities. Yao Ming is a good example. I call him the best China export to America. It's very nice, very clean, very entertaining, very good. And his contract is about $73 million was. I bet that many Americans would love to take that job, right? I would. But they hired him. He must be special, some special talents, some special thing that is about him they would like to hire him. Herbert Hoover, worst American president until recently. But the reason he is on this slide is that he was hired by the Chinese emperor as his royal mining consultant because he had some special talent. He was the highest salaried man during that time. It's about 1890, I think. After he got his degree from Stanford, he went to work for a British company in outbacks of Australia, then moved to China, lived for 2 years before he came back to become president. So talents, it's been going on for a long time. If you have special talents, you can move around, you can move about, you can go to different places. But the problem is this. It's the law of economics. When people can move anywhere on the globe, when jobs can move anywhere on the globe, this is actually from the new commission on the scales of American workforce called Tough Choice or Tougher Times. It's a very interesting argument. If an Indian engineer or Chinese engineer makes only 5 to 7 times less than an American engineer, why would anybody offer a job to Americans if we only have the same qualifications? So this is a hard fact. That's why when Robert Compton debated with me, he said, well, as a venture capitalist, I kept going to invest in India, in China, because I cannot find the same talents in the US. I said, no. You cannot find the same talents at the same price. AT&T has made the same argument. AT&T said, we can't bring the 5,000 jobs back from India because we don't have enough qualified Americans. I said, no, that's wrong. You cannot. You are not willing to pay them at the same price. But that's, however, they don't want to admit that. Well, if you look at Google, Microsoft, Bill Gates, and Intel, they kept talking about they can't find the talents here. I don't believe Chinese college graduates and Indian college graduates are better than American college graduates. Actually, there's interesting data. McKinsey has recently released, said less than 10% of Chinese college graduates are qualified to work for international companies. There's interesting data, actually, showing a lot of in the book. So, but we have to face this hard fact as educators. What other talents, abilities, knowledge, skills, perspectives we can instill, we can impart in our children so they can be worth the 5 to 7 times more than students in other countries? By the developing countries, price is always going to be like, this is like a global movement. When China's labor price goes up, the low-level jobs shift to Cambodia and Vietnam. And when the price goes up, they'll go other places. So basically in China for the past 20 years, economical growth has to do with cheap labor. Basically China had all the jobs that used to belong to Singapore, South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand. Now they're all in China because those countries grow up, become wealthier, and the labor price goes up. So it's kind of interesting to move around. But now, for us, the real issue of globalization, just purely economically, is this. Think about the knowledge, the skills you have to teach in your students. That will be different from others. That's why right now, in terms of global international benchmarking, to be the same as other countries, to catch up with others, may not make sense at all. The second problem with globalization, well, I will just show you this funny quote from Thomas Friedman anyway. This is Friedman's interpretation that the Indians and Chinese are eating our lunch because they're cheaper. So actually, he said, I was joking with Friedman and Thomas Friedman and I have a kind of scheduled debate in November in England about the same thing. I said, even if your daughter finished the homework, if they don't do something different than Chinese Indians, they still won't have lunch. It's about the difference. It's not about doing the same thing. It's better than others. But the other problem of globalization has accelerated rate of relevance of poverty, of hunger, of disease. I call a series of global problems, which all of us have to face. The hungry children in Africa affect us, affect our children. We cannot ignore them. There's a global problem we have to address. Their well-being is very much interconnected with our well-being of our children. Here I have this, by the way, that's the H1n1 virus. If you have never seen it, you may not want to deal with it, but it looks very nice, actually, these guys. The globalization has helped spread the disease so fast. It's one of the fastest spreading disease because of global travel, because of death of distance. And, of course, global warming, human conflicts. You know how much money we spend every year on trying to scare other people or to kill other people in the U.S.? Iraq war is already about $3 trillion in terms of everything. We spend a lot of money on this. Now, these global problems are also a consequence of globalization, but also requires new knowledge, new talents, new way of educating our children to deal with them. The other factor, as I said, talking about is technology. It's the virtual world. Technology begins to affect our jobs, affect how we live as well. This is an example of how technology decreased the value of certain types of knowledge. How many of you have been to London? A lot of you. So many of you have taken this black cab, right? All of you have taken okay. You know how hard it is to become a black cab driver? Do you know? No, you don't? Okay. It takes longer than community college. You know that? Because all the drivers have to be licensed. They have to pass this test called the knowledge test. They're very audacious to call this the knowledge test. And it's about, you have to memorize all these 300-some routes, all parks. It takes on average 36 months to pass this test. It's good knowledge, right? Actually, recently there's some good study to show that this black cab drivers, their brain actually have a different growth part. They're more like birds, have a navigation system. It's brain scan, serious. It's serious knowledge. It's unlike, in the U.S., you go to New York and they say, I want to go this place. How to get there? The taxi driver asks you, right? You say, well, are you driving or am I driving? But anyway. So in London, they will never ask anybody to do that. So this knowledge is very important. But this knowledge has been challenged by satellite navigation system. In the UK, they call it sat-nav. In the US, we call them GPS. A few years ago, 2 years ago, a BBC reporter said, I bet the GPS can beat the taxi driver. So we don't need the knowledge test anymore. And he issued this challenge. A cab driver named Andy said, I will take you on it. So they had a contest. They had a race. They had 4 stops from outskirts of London, tried to reach to Trafalgar Square, downtown London. The cab driver beat him by 27 minutes. So it's still better, right? But 27 minutes, 3 years, lots of money, which would you prefer, right? And by the way, technology advances all the time. The cab driver won because he was able to judge how fast he can make turns. In this traffic congestions, this system was supposed to have instant feedback on traffic conditions, but wasn't fast enough. So now, next time, maybe in 2 years, it will change. But anyway, actually, the London authority is already reconsidering changing this test, considering GPS systems. Then the value of that knowledge is decreased. It's been decreased. In London now you have minicabs. Minicabs actually employ cheap immigrants. They come in, they give them a satellite navigation system, go drive. They don't care. They can drive, but they can still get you most places. So as a result of this technology, automation we lose jobs. A lot of these jobs are being automated. Jobs being lost to technology. That's 21st, it's a fact. It's 21st century. This is happening all the time, so now we have to consider outsourcing and automation all the time in our education about what knowledge is valuable, what knowledge is not valuable. Then I'm going to talk for another 15, 20 minutes, then I'll stop. You can take a break or you can ask questions. We're going to move on with some other things. But there is hope. We always say called hope, right? That's what we call a new hope. Where does hope lie? So we have to be creative about this. Our new hope lies in Madonna. Yeah. Do you like Madonna? No? Anybody? Oh, you like her songs? Do you like the person? No. Okay, fine. The reason why we like Madonna is Madonna's story. Madonna was born in Bay City, Michigan. Bay City, how many of you know Bay City, Michigan? Anyone knows? Oh, yeah, yeah. Are you from Michigan? Illinois, okay. I'm from Illinois, okay, once. Yeah. But Bay City is a very small, tiny city in Michigan. You know, if Michigan people always tell you, you show the thumb, the thumb area, inside by the Saginaw Bay. It's a small town, 2,000 people. Surrounding area, maybe 20,000, but including Midnight and Dow Cornings, those. She has some talent, right? Singing and dancing. But without globalization, if she had stayed in Bay City, if there's no airplane to bring talents, bring audience to her, or there's no CD-ROMs, no DVDs, no television to send her talents to be consumed by people from other places, how much money can she make? Bay City, 2,000 people, 20,000 people, even if 10% of them like her, and paid, I don't know, $1 a day, she wouldn't be making much money. She cannot become a billionaire. Now, but today with globalization, she has an expanded market. Any tiny little creativity or talent become useful. So the lesson number one is a new hope it lies in Madonna is because your students, if they have something special, something that may only be enjoyed by a small percentage of people locally, now can be capitalized on globally. That increases this. Traditionally, our schools have always discriminated against those talents. Against them. Because they're of no value locally. Remember, it was a local environment. Now imagine global. So I think the first suggestion I would give you, do not discriminate against any talent. Any special things your children may have. Do not use standards to say, you do not do this, therefore that's useless. You never know. I think that's number two. I hope also lies in eBay. eBay. You guys do eBay in San Diego? Right? Good. eBay is in essence a global garage sale. Right? Garage sale relies on this simple economical principle of what they call diversity in needs or demands. You turn one man's trash into another man's treasure. That's the same idea. That's the general idea. That's the basic principle of economics, right? But garage sales, if we were doing local garage sales, you hold local garage sales all the time, right? They don't work very well. Why? Because people visit your garage sales are from your same neighborhood, your same community. They have the same trash as you do. So there's no need, there's no real need to. So a lot of times you have, begin with a lot of junk in the morning, you have lemonade, Kool-Aid, music, everything. In the end, you still end up with the same junk. I mean, you may be a sale of a few things. But eBay transformed that. eBay is global. eBay makes it possible to bring people from other places who may not have the same things as you do to appreciate what you have. Distance, gaps in culture, remember this diversity, transforms this, makes it work. Example again from Michigan, Petoskey. How many of you know Petoskey? You may not have heard of. Oh, yeah, it's you. Okay, Petoskey. Petoskey. This has this little rocks on the beaches of Lake Michigan. We call them Petoskey stones, right? I don't think if you lived in Petoskey, you can sell that Petoskey stone to your neighbor who can just go to the beach, pick up one, right? But Petoskey stones are sold on eBay. You can buy them. I've also seen people selling genuine Michigan maple leaves on eBay. People buy them as well, right? I've seen some crazy stuff being sold on eBay. Someone was selling dinosaur poops. Seriously. A guy from England sold 2 jars of ghosts. Well, you think that's crazy, right? But the crazier thing is that someone bought it. That's just amazing stuff. So what it says that distance, traditional distance helps you to think, to turn something that may not be of value to be valuable. Now, it's back to something serious. You think speaking with a New York accent, if you were in New York, it's nothing, right? Just, if they come to California, just laugh at them, right? Accent. But the accent can be of economical value. Why? For example, look at Indian call centers. In India, the call centers, they have to train those people to speak with certain accent. If you know how to train them, it's valuable. It actually has been that the people, if you go to India, they'll have a lot of accent trainers. They want to train you to speak with like a British, like Australia. I was actually in England. I spent a few months. It was 2-3 years ago, traveling around England and giving talks. One place, northern England, County Durham, because their auto industry was dying, so they become call centers. So I asked those people, I said, why do people want to set up call centers in this countryside, in County Durham? They said, we have better accent. Our accent sounds more honest than those from London. I said, that's valuable. Uniqueness. So eBay is about uniqueness. It's about difference, about what you can offer cross-distance to other people. Now imagine our schools. What can we offer that others don't have? That others don't have. It's something we have to think about, the cultures, abilities, and our talents. We also have another story. New technology brings new jobs, demands new skills, new talents. This is the opposite of the London story. This is a Chinese guy. If you go to China, you'll see this a lot. They hold signs, some of them are handwritten, some of them printed, standing at highway exits. This is what we call human GPSs. Their knowledge of the city, unlike that in London, is becoming of economical value now. Why? Because in China, there are many more people buying cars, start owning their own cars. Last half year, China sold 6 million new cars. Because a lot of people buying cars. When they have cars, you drive around, right? You go to other places. But people are not, get used to driving, so they get lost all the time. The second thing, Chinese cities, all of them are going through major construction. The roads change overnight. No city can update its maps or GPS fast enough. So, therefore, human beings are become valuable. You get these guys who know the local roads, will stand at highway exits. When your car stops, they'll come around you after you pass in the toll booth. They say, I will offer you a guide through the city for $5, for $10, for $50, depends on what happens. That knowledge becomes very valuable. So there's a new professional coming out. So one thing we should tell Schwarzenegger or Obama to solve the U.S. unemployment problem, take down all road signs in America. You can hire a lot of people, right? Come down, San Diego, standing there. Hey, $5, you want it or not? It's great, right? I would solve that problem. But anyway, new technologies coming up to drive a new economy, demands new skills and new knowledge. Also, globalization creates new professions, demands for new things. For example, for businesses to locate globally, the first thing you need to know is culture, is how to be successful in another culture. Americans, businesses lose really in the billions of dollars every year because they lack understanding of a culture they want to move into. Big businesses can hire culture consultants, smaller businesses cannot. I was in Australia in May. One of the fastest growing professions in Australia is those who are Asia literate, to serve as a business culture consultants. Are we educating our children to do that? That's new knowledge we need. In the US, the growing in profession is interpreters and translators. We need them in our courtrooms. We need them in our hospitals. We need them in our borders. We need them to take our people across to other places. Every school, as you know this, we need foreign language teachers. We need people who know how to connect our schools with other countries. These are new professions brought about globalization. We need people to take care of new immigrants. We need people to market our creativity, our talents to other places. We need people actually even on the ground to win a war, in Afghanistan or in other places. So foreign language and cultural competences. The other part is the virtual. As I mentioned about the virtual, the rise of the virtual environment creates new jobs, new skills as well. So what I would call the new hope also lies in virtual marriages. Do you know about virtual marriages? No, you guys are serious people. You don't get into this stuff. Virtual marriages. This is a website. I just want to show a website to say how new technology changes how we live. This is called iApartment from Taiwan. The idea is that you spend some real money. You go rent a virtual apartment. You can have 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom studios, whatever you like. Then you can post your profile like you're doing dating, and you can get virtually married and moved in virtually, live in this apartment. What's interesting, if you track down, we have a grant study in this kind of virtual psychology from ASF. We've been studying this stuff. Then these virtual couples start getting virtual arguments about the color of the virtual bathtubs, the TV, the shower curtains. They get those, and their psychological response is almost the same as in real life. Okay, so now don't criticize yet. A lot of people get on this. It's been used by a lot of senior homes, nursery homes, for those people who cannot move. It's been used for young kids to try out. In the U.S., we teach those kids about not having babies. Right? They carry a fake baby. Right? Remember that? It's not working. I would throw them into this. Have them get virtually married to someone. They will get tired of that guy soon. I said, forget about it. I'm not going to hang out with you anymore. It's maybe more useful. Now, however, the reason I gave this, imagine the skills and knowledge that needed to create these websites, to maintain these websites, to produce those tiny little virtual TVs people can buy. There's a little object you have to buy, virtual flowers. How can you sell those? I call them digital produce, like digital lettuce, right? You have to buy those things. Who does that? What new knowledge, what skills we need? Well, at least do we have enough therapists to consult those people who get hurt in virtual marriages, right? Virtual consultants. Do we have the knowledge? Do we have the skills? It challenges a lot of things. And about Second Life. How many of you get into Second Life? 1, 2. Well, that's good. You get into it. All of you need a Second Life. Okay. It's a virtual social environment. It's a virtual economy. In this, you can create objects you own. You can sell to others. That's the basic idea. It's popular. Millions of users. A lot of cities, a lot of businesses have built their buildings, replicate their cities, streets inside, like Amsterdam, London. A lot of universities, Michigan State University, we have a virtual college education. You can visit our college, walk through the buildings, talk to our students. I have a virtual Chinese city, which we use to teach Mandarin Chinese. You can visit a Chinese museum, go to a Chinese restaurant, order food, so we use that to do all kinds of stuff. I spend a lot of money doing this thing because you rent it. It's like a condo. You have rent. It's about 600,000 acres I own. I'm kind of rich in it. But the real point is that has to do with Ansi Chuang. According to Business Week in 2006, she became the first online personality to achieve $1 million for trading virtual properties. Virtual properties. Her story is very interesting. She was Chinese from Wuhan, Hubei, married a German guy, moved to Frankfurt, did not have a job. In 2005, she spent $9.95 a month, registered in Second Life. When Second Life just came online, Second Life is based here, actually, Linden Lab, in Los Angeles, I think. And she started to build those virtual buildings, but with an Oriental theme, courtyard, houses. People liked her stuff. They began to buy stuff from her. Then she made $1 million. Today, she owns the Ansi Chuang Studio, which employs over 100 people globally to create virtual buildings, virtual streets for big clients. It's a new profession, new architect, and there's no subprime mortgage problems inside either. It's just going well. Now, the skills, the knowledge you need to develop these things. What do we have? What are we doing with these people? And then We have goat farmers. Just give you one last example, goat farming. You know goat farming? How many of you go to goat farming? You don't know goat farming? Come on, you guys are really behind. But, goat farming is something really cool. This is a game, you play these games called MMORPGs, right? Massively multiplayer online role-playing games. Like the World of Warcraft. Have you heard of those games, right? EverQuest, you've heard of those games. You haven't? Oh, talk to your students. They will be happy to know. Do you know EverQuest? Or do you know? But anyway, so in these games, you have a profession. You grow up. By spending hours and hours, you can upgrade your skills. You can do things faster. You can take a profession. You can be a blacksmith. You can be a medicine man. But as you spend hours, your skills gets up. You earn these virtual points, basically points. And those points can buy you nice-looking clothes, better weapons, better houses. In most of the games are like this. But it's like in real life. Not everybody wants to spend hours earning those points. What do people do? But they like those things. They buy them. They buy the points using real money. So it's called real money trading. You buy virtual points. This started in the 1980s. You buy the points, and then you buy the status from others. So those points are called gold, virtual gold. And then when there's demand, there's supply. There's a whole industry popping up called the gold farming industry. It's called the gold farm industry. And so there's a lot of gold farming industries in China, in Mexico, in Romania, and in other places. So what I have is a little video. It's about 2 minutes, so you can watch this, about gold farming in China from New York Times.
In China, there are textile factories, toy factories, electronics factories, and now online gaming factories. This is David Barboza for the New York Times. The world of online gaming is exploding. People are logging onto the internet by the millions to play popular fantasy and virtual reality games like Lineage, EverQuest, and the World of Warcraft. And because of the growth of such games, a massive virtual economy has emerged. People who play the games are trading their virtual weapons, coins, and other goods that help enhance the fun of the games to other online players. And all of a sudden, some of the biggest suppliers of these goods are here in China. Some have called the places virtual sweatshops or gold farming factories because in internet cafes, old warehouses, and even private homes, 20, 30, or even 100 young people are playing online games for a living. And they are harvesting virtual gold that they then sell to wealthier gamers. Naturally, the companies that created these online games aren't too happy and call the trading of their virtual goods illegal. A few weeks ago, I visited an online gaming factory in the city of Fuzhou in coastal Fujian province. I saw a factory with about 70 people hunched over their computers, killing monsters and racking up points. These are kids with baggy jeans and drowsy eyes. But who could blame them? They usually work 12-hour shifts, and they earn between $75 and $250 a month. Many get less than a quarter an hour. In China, some estimate there are 100,000 people working in these online gaming factories. But perhaps there are more. The factories mostly operate in secret because of the illegality of this kind of work is still in question, and many of them have dormitories. Most workers, I'm told, last 2 or 3 months. Some stay for a year. They're young kids, mostly men. Some are as young as 16. Some are high school dropouts. Some are handicapped. And some just love to get paid for playing games. This is David Barboza for the New York Times.
Now, how big is this industry? It's about $2 billion a year industry. This is huge. It's growing, it's fast, it's very interesting. It's happening right now. Then finally, in the virtual environment, everybody is an author. Now you do not, according to Murdoch. According to Murdoch, you do not need a Fox News to reach broader audience. If you have the talents, here's just 2 simple examples. This is all on YouTube, by the way. The guy, there's 2 kids from the left side is two Chinese kids. We call them Chinese Backstreet boys or Chinese backdorm boys. Their story is just fascinating. They were just two college kids, and they were doing lip syncing of some music of Backstreet Boys. They released on YouTube or on the internet. They become instant famous. And they did some more. Now they've graduated, these two kids. I followed their story. Now they are sponsored by Nokia, the cell phone maker, to have a studio in Beijing to make movies and to do lip syncing, some more. And the other guy is even funnier, Matt Hardin. Okay? And if you want to find him out, just go to Where the Hell is Matt? That's his website, .com. Where the Hell is Matt? He was a high school dropout from Connecticut. Went to work in Australia as a video game. His whole life, he had nothing else. He didn't have any skills. He was just playing video games. So in Brisbane, worked there for a few years, earned a little money, and they decided to say, my life should be better than just making video games. So to make his life better, what he did is use his money, start traveling inside Asia. 2005, he was in Hanoi with a bunch of friends. They were taking pictures. And one of his friends sat and said, hey, Matt, why don't you do that dance? He said, what dance? Because he never knew what to dance. He said, well, just your stupid move. He said, okay, I'll do it. So he just made a move, a few minutes, and sent to his parents, and somehow the video leaked onto the internet, made on YouTube. Very quickly, millions of people watched him. And because the dance is so silly. It's like a William Hung story. Remember William Hung? But he didn't know how to dance. He still doesn't know how to dance. But he was so popular, I guess, everybody likes it. So a company, a chewing gum company, hired him to say, why don't you do your dance, but on a global scale? I'll give you money to sponsor you for a year, anywhere you want to go. So he went to 30-some countries, danced in some very strange places, very interesting, and cut back into a short video, released on YouTube, 30 million views in a few months. Then after that, the company, they're so successful, why don't you do it again? So they give him money again. He traveled around and invited people to dance again. And this stuff. So what this space action shows to them, today, remember it was Madonna? Madonna needed an agent. William Hung needed a platform. Today, a lot of us do not need a platform. We have direct interaction with our audience. Look at the Huffington Post. It's a great example, right? If you know how to write, if you're good, you can make it out there. So this changes how we think about talents, skills, and knowledge. Before, we have to be selected. Now, a lot of people can directly reach out. But are we teaching our students to become entrepreneurs? Are we teaching them the ability to manage this media, to be able to move out to the front, to meet their potential clients or potential customers? That's actually the question. When we think literacy is important, when we talk about multimedia literacy, do we really teach our children about multimedia literacy? Are we serious? We're not very serious. Actually, I was talking to the Australian Curriculum Board in May. They said they are redoing the national curriculum. They're thinking about literacy. So they mentioned multimedia literacy. I said, who is writing the content? Must be some old English teacher or professor writing about multimedia literacy. Why don't you get a filmmaker to write it? Because you think writing an essay is easier than making a 1-minute, 2-minute multimedia production? No. But we don't treat that serious. We just think, oh, just watch TV, the multimedia literacy. It's not. But this is very interesting, how to manage the online place. So after all of those things, what do we come back to say the worthwhile knowledge? I have to say government people, policymakers are not stupid. They're all smart. They have all realized that 21st century skills are different from 20th century skills. This is the framework for the 21st century partnership of the US. As you can see, it mentions core subjects. It mentions about literacy, ICT literacy, talks about cross-cultural, talks about global problems. But the problem with this list is that it's too long. By the time you finish reading it, you should be retiring. They are not trying to teach all of this. One problem with the American education policy from local to national is we never take things out. We kept adding things. So therefore, now you have a bloated curriculum. You try to teach everything, regardless of your race, age, gender, regardless of your interest, motivation. We teach you everything. And we want you to be everything. We should be learning from Spencer about what knowledge is worthwhile. Out of this list, should everybody learn everything from here? Is it possible to learn all of this? If it's true, R.D. Duncan just adding a few days to your school calendar doesn't work. We got to add another 50 years to our, if we would not be K-12, it would be K-55, you know. Maybe we can cover all the subjects. But I don't think it's possible. The Europeans are doing the same thing. You can see here, Europeans have begun to think foreign languages is as important as native language. This is the European framework. 1 and 2. The Europeans are thinking digital competence as important as math, technology, and science combined. That's why they're separate, these separate categories. But we're still not willing to give up certain things. We're still trying to teach everything. You look at this list. That's why you find out teachings become harder and harder. That's why I teach at universities. I can teach whatever I like to teach. Nobody tells me, well, actually, I shouldn't say that since we have a dean standing here, but it's there's only one person who starts thinking about possibly there's something we can dump. But actually, he's not willing to say this. This is Daniel Pink. He refused to say we should dump. He said we should have both. But I don't agree. But anyway, Daniel Pink's new book, not new anymore, 2005, A Whole New Mind. Pink says, almost like what I was talking about, is right now in the information society, we value the left brain directed thinking skills. And those terms, sequential, literal, functional, basically translates into, if you believe in Howard Gardner, it would be your quantitative abilities, your verbal abilities, and your logic abilities. In school subjects, that would be your language arts, your math, and the science. Pink said that's important before. But because of the 3 A's, Asia, that's basically outsourcing globalization. I wouldn't call it Asia anymore. Africa, well, that's still A, that's right. Okay, he's right. Okay. And automation, that's machine. And abundance, I just need to explain what abundance is. Abundance basically means when a society enters a certain stage of wealth, we have more money, you start to desire something that's just beyond functional. For example, look at elevators. Those old buildings, they basically have like a cage, can get you up, can down, that's functional. Today, you see a lot of elevators, you decorate them, you make them look nicer, some people play TV. That's age of abundance. Look at some women. Nothing against women, but this example works very well. Some women would spend thousands of dollars to buy bags that do not hold any more than a plastic bag. That's the age of abundance, right? We buy things that we like. That doesn't necessarily for its function. The vice president of General Motors once said, General Motors is not in the auto industry. This is before the bankruptcy, okay. So he said, we were in the art business. We were making moving sculptures that happened to be a transportation vehicle. Look at the Hummer. How so beautiful, right? It's just the Hummer. But anyway, so they were very into art. They said, today what sells is art, is design. So because of the 3 A's, Pink says, the value of the right brain, talented thinking skills become more important. The right brain, focuses on something that's simultaneous. Focus on something that's aesthetic and metaphorical and contextual and synthetic, which Pink actually translates into the 6 new essential aptitudes in the new what I call conceptual age. He thinks what matters now, what matters more is the ability to design, to be creative, to come up with something that's artistic, that's beautiful, and functional. This is actually quite true. I went back to the labor statistics data and find out the number of designers is on the rise. Designers include a lot. Designers meaning let's say hairstyle, actually. Speaking, from my hair, you really know we need better hairstylists, designers. I had this in China, by the way. So it's from designers of clothing, interior designers, web design. How many bad websites have you seen, right? Designers. So art people. But it's not necessarily traditional art. It's the passion to create, to be different as well. But in our schools, do we encourage that? No Child Left Behind has secured more art programs, anything else. And our schools, even if traditional, we don't necessarily teach that very well. And we need people who can tell stories, who can do narratives, not just logic. Narrative. J.K. Rowling is a good example. Harry Potter series, right? But that requires passion. Andy Hargreaves was saying this in Singapore. Actually, I was listening to him. He said, "We have more children now who have become literate, but they enjoy less of reading. They can read, but they don't enjoy it. The same thing goes. We have kids who can dissect the grammar, but who cannot really write stories. Right? They may be correct writing essays. The reason actually I took my son out of public school, sent him to a private school, was really, he's a creative writer, but he could not pass the standardized test score, the test in the Michigan MIP. He couldn't do the rubric. So I said, just forget about it. Let's get out of here. We want people to do the stories, to be able to create. We discourage these kids who come to our classroom, our school, with imaginary friends, right? We kill imagination. We focus on the mechanics of language. Symphony, that's the ability to synthesize, to put things together. That's leadership. That's the dean, that's the school principal, that's the school teacher who can synthesize different elements, put together, make something that's meaningful, that's useful. Traditionally, as engineers, we've been encouraging more analysis, to pick things apart. Today, how do you hold things back together? Empathy. That's your ability to feel the feelings of your coworkers, of your team members, of your institution. To understand, but today's management is about being able to communicate, being able to feel for others. Play, that's entertainment. That's your Jay Leno's. That's your Oprah Winfrey. That's where your Jerry Seinfeld. Depends on who you pick, right? The ones who make you laugh in hard times or in good times. Meaning, that's the ability to understand life transcends the chaotic environment for everybody. That's your pastors, that's your psychotherapists, that's your priests, that's people who help you. Now, all these skills and associated jobs, according to Pink, are highly contextualized, highly humane, is human-related, and highly localized in a local place. Therefore, they cannot be done by a machine or be done in a foreign land, and it's in high demand in the age of abundance. That's why the right brain skills are necessary, are important. So I examined a lot of different proposals. Here's a short answer, then we'll take a break. Then I found in almost everybody talk about 21st century skills. Also, in my own analysis, I would say, first of all, to make sense, we must cultivate skills and knowledge that are not available at a cheaper price in other countries or that can be rendered useless by machines. So for us to think as educators, we have to think about what those things are. Number two, we have to think about creativity. That's both a passion and ability to be creative, to be different. Creativity are not simply cognitive skills that to be different. It is more of a passion and confidence that you can be different from others, that you're encouraging. Standardization and standardized assessment discourages kills creativity because we force them to be the same. New skills and knowledge, cognitive skills, well, I don't need to mention more. And finally, number 5, is emotional intelligence, ability to manage your own emotions and interact with others on the level of emotion. Now, these are the skills we need in the 21st century, but how to get there? How do we do this is what I think we have to discuss next I promised you a break, and I will take a break now. We'll be back in 10 minutes, and Paula promised that you do not run away from this place. After 10 minutes, you will be back, right? Yes, okay. Quarter two. Thank you. We'll see you at quarter two. It's a quarter, so I'm going to be serious.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you.
Is that what you do in California, where you get people to, as students, you do this? In Michigan, we do this, right? We do this, okay. But anyway, you're quiet now. Thanks, Paula. It's very nice of you. So we're talking about what kind of knowledge will be useful, but how do we find these things? So I have to bring something as an educational psychologist, something what I call hardcore. We have to think about feasibility. Number one, you have to consider feasibility of individual students. For whatever reason, either randomness, nature, or nurture, we know our students arrive in our schools differently. That's something we have to agree, right? For example, no matter how hard I try, I cannot become another Picasso or Michael Phelps. I cannot even be a Madonna. It's very hard. And so our students are differently abled. The growth is different, so we have to accept that. You cannot, no matter how hard you try, there will be people who are different. Number two, we have to realize the limitation of schools. We cannot say schools can do everything, solve all problems. We sometimes get into this belief that we can do a lot. Yes, we can. We cannot do everything. So with those things, we have to think about schools have to make choices. How do we cultivate those abilities that will make sense? So the suggestion number one is, I take it from Lee Kuan Yew, not because I just came back from Singapore. It's really, I think, here's something interesting. People always talk about why Singapore is so important. Singapore, people tend to praise Singapore as a good country, something. There means something interesting, because one thing that surprised me in Singapore, Singapore is so small, but it has a very booming aviation industry. How is that possible? By the time you take off, you already invaded Malaysia. But how can you really make it possible around the aviation industry? It's really interesting. I think it has followed with the idea about be unique. Be something different. This is the calling. So something different in your schools, not the same. Remember, this is really against the idea of trying to catch up with others in the same domain, to be different, to be unique. Also, think about our students as global workers. They're not local workers. You're not preparing them to work locally. Even if you would try to prepare them to work locally, the local can change a lot. So now, with these two principles in mind, what can we teach, what can we think about education? So I want to bring this idea called education ecosystems. We have to understand different schools, different countries, different education systems are different. There's no reason for them to be the same, to make them the same. For example, I have a bunch of schools here. That's what schools have in China, in a lot of developing countries. That's almost the classroom I went through. I went back this summer, took my son there. It's still very much the same, the top one. One teacher, blackboard, kids had shared textbooks, and dark, no lighting. And what they can learn, what they can teach. Imagine this kid is actually writing on the brick, and there's the classrooms in Africa. Now imagine what we are given. We are fortunate to have all this. Do you think it's right for us to teach the same thing? Yes, the current policy is basically saying that let's turn those classrooms into this. We're teaching our kids to learn the same thing that can be learned with a piece of paper or even a stick on sand. Remember that we're abandoning, someone was telling me this. Our schools have this equipment, but we're asked to reduce the use of technology, back to basics. There also actually was a study showing that about 31 states in the US, over 80% of English teachers do not teach writing on the computer because the state tests are given on paper. Isn't that silly? Today, your students are not allowed to write on the computer. What's the point of doing those things, right? When everybody else is editing, composing on the computer. That's why should we abandon this and have this? This is one idea about, and there's some more about ecological differences. Americans' cultural values are different. We value art performances. We have a lot of children's museums here, right? And we have the soccer moms. All those kind of different cultures, different values. We build different things. Versus we have, I call the homework mom in the middle. That's China. The homework mom, we have kids, actually the top picture was kids holding their certificate of completing a math Olympiad training course. Kids are very proud of that versus showing art. Culturally, we have different values. Culturally, we are different. It's very hard to convince this Chinese system to do like this. Or they don't have the materials to build so many museums. Adding more courses, adding more school time is basically depriving kids of engaging other places. Should we not have them visit museums? Should we burn all our violins and the piano? Do it something else? That's basically what it's talking about. So the education ecosystem is in essence means we have different cultural values. We're endowed with different facilities, different materials. Therefore, we produce different kids and talents. So here I have some summary about what American schools have been traditionally good at. And by the way, our systems, there's a lot of problems for American system, but something good. But these values are at least before No Child Left Behind. That's called the BN part. It's before No Child Left Behind. We had this value. The values, I think the most important thing I learned about American education system, that's valuable to produce the talents we need. Different talents, creativity, passion for learning, and to be passion to be different. Is number one, I learned this from basically, when you have children, you always learn from them. The first I learned from my daughter, it's called the school talent shows. In California, you do this too, right? It's not only a Michigan thing, talent shows, right? I used to think we'd only schools in miserable weather do that just to pass the time, but you do this too. Okay, anyway. So what school talent shows, you can imagine what do you do. It's basically you have a bunch of kids come together, right? And but they're very serious. It expresses some great educational principles. Number one, it values individual talents. It allows people like McDonald to survive. Recently, the Goldie Hawn was talking, I think, on CNN or other places. She went to Congress. She was very mad recently about this education reform. She said, I was a horrible high school student. But nobody told me I was horrible, so I had very good confidence, self-confidence. So I could have my dreams. But now our children cannot have that, false belief now, but they can still be good, even though the test scores are horrible, because the government is telling you you're really bad, and your parents should know that as well. It was really interesting, the statement. What I was trying to say that is, the idea is that whether you're bad or good is so much to say which criteria. Remember my drinking gap is to say that if you allow individual talents, we tolerate, we put up with them. School talent shows, in essence, values that allows everybody, whatever you do. You could be jiu-jitsu, you could be cooking, you could be dancing, singing, banging on some cooking pots. That's talent. Nobody judges to say that's of less value, that's more value. Everybody gets to show. Number two, it inspires a passion and a responsibility which we need in the 21st century. This is something about work and ethics as well, about passion and responsibility. If it's something you choose to do, you have passion, you have responsibility. I was on a study trip with Mark Tucker. That's the group before they produced the report of tough times or tough choices. We were studying about the difference between worker quality in different countries. We took a study tour in China. We visited Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangdong. So we were talking to this general manager of General Motors. We asked them, so are you saving money of talents in people? He said, no, we're not. We save money on the floor workers. So we used to believe that we can hire middle-level managers from China, but that's not working. He said, we asked why. He said, number one, most Chinese engineers They don't like their work. They're not passionate. They can change their job for $5 more a month. They drop it. He said in the US, when we have workers, they love their work. They're passionate about what they do, some engineers. Then he gave an example. He said, he managed a company. He was from India. He managed companies, plants in Brazil, Italy, China, and I think Japan. He said, if on the plants, if there's a leakage of oil of any of the machines, in China, the workers, engineers, at the best, they put a cupboard, cover it. In all other places, those engineers will sit down to solve the problem. This, what I call this passion about whether you like your job or not. And the same thing, actually, if you look at other values, say service, you find the same thing about whether you're passionate about what you do, or you have the responsibility. Another, I think, talent shows teaches you to tolerate deviation, to be different. You're allowed to be different. At the same time, in this place, basically, I believe you can be different. This tolerance for deviation is key for the success of anything, actually. There's a great book by a Yale professor called Amy Trott wrote about tolerance as the key to the rising of hyperpowers. She studied a lot of big dynasties, hyperpowers, not superpower, hyperpower, like Tang Dynasty, the Roman Empire, the US right now. She said the key to the success of this is tolerance of different perspectives, different talents, and the ability to allow them to be successful. And when these mighty countries fail, it often has to do with trying to cleanse different perspectives. US now actually is facing a big problem of that. US is trying to go back to this very waspy ideas. Was trying to say anybody else is decreasing, is actually causing trouble. This is not actually, coincidentally, another writer, Richard Florida, has written as well. He studied many communities. He says the prosperity of a community depends on 3 T's: technology, talents, and tolerance. Tolerance is very important. Tolerance is developed through this kind of activities. Is to believe other people may be of value as well. May not be of value to you, but may be of value to others. That's, I think, it teaches that through talent shows. And finally, it cultivates entrepreneurship that allows you, encourages you, when you want to do the talent show, you try to employ your brother, your sister, your friends to come to become your pops. They always help you, right? You're managing your little things. In the US, the next big growth will be small businesses, small to medium businesses, not those huge employers. When those big employers still talk about, we're going to employ a lot of you, that's not true. If you look again, go to labor statistics, you'll find out. But we are preparing a new generation of people who will manage themselves, who will be able to manage themselves, not necessarily be employed in Michigan. Those companies those plants don't exist anymore. When I drive through Michigan, they're not there. Nobody works there anymore. The second thing I learned is from my son's actually second grade teacher, Mrs. Steinacker. I still remember her name. She's very cool. She told me, she said, I believe children are popcorn. There's no S, the popcorn. I said, why? She said, because there's some pop early, some pop late. That's why I said, well, I joked with her. I said, well, there got to be a few who never pop, get burned as well. It happens. But this belief, I think, is really entrenched in all American education teachers. Most teachers do believe that children are different. Some learn fast, some learn slower. Most of them eventually catch up. It fits actually educational data as well. We also have faith in every child. We believe they can learn. That faith is absolutely important. American education system, in contrast, sociologically speaking, takes what they call a contest model. We allow every child to race until they're 18 before we make any judgment about them. Everybody can do the same thing. It's possible. In other countries, especially in China, even Britain included, they do a sponsor model. We select them early. We give them tests, right? You go this track, you go this track, you can do all those things. But But here, some of them are told you cannot learn. This is something, have faith in every child is something I really feel is so important. Because a lot of times, we may not like it, but educators can hurt children. Education can harm our children. And we get harmed them so very often, harm them psychologically and sometimes physically. Have faith in every child helps people to be confident. But now we're losing that. Again, that's why I said before, no child behind this. This popcorn is very important. And another one is that we give them lots of chances. We give them third. But sometimes now the tough guy said, well, giving them chances is basically giving them excuses. I don't believe that. It's actually not. So now, this is the American schools can offer. What this system basically has is what I call, it has created an environment that enables schools to cultivate certain talents. People actually argue with me. They said, well, I don't think American schools teach creativity any better than other systems. I said, that's true. Because creativity cannot be taught. Creativity can be killed. American schools kill less than other systems. That's the only reason. We kill less. Now we are trying to kill more because of standardization. So what we need to do is to preserve that and expand our capacity to support creativity. Those right brain talents, most of them are being killed. We need to tolerate, we need to support, we need to be more deliberate in cultivating creativity, cultivate artistic and music and other talents. So here's what somebody was suggesting. We do not have to deliberately to make everybody, you're a mathematician, you're an artist, you're a musician. We should take in the natural diversity in our students and cultivate that. That's why people say, now in the 21st century, what do we need? We need to discover, develop, and use our children's strength and not trying to fix their deficiencies. Our education system right now, through standardization, is in essence trying to fix everybody's deficiency, ignore their strength. What's valuable is their strength. We're not trying to produce a country of test takers who all score high in math and science reading, because that will not give them the ability, the talents that were worth, remember, the 5 to 7 times more than other countries. We thrive in individual talents. We thrive in the passion. Let's not allow ourselves and the government to tell our students, you're bad because you cannot read as well as Johnny when you're 8. I may be able to read as well when I'm 9. Or I may not have to because I can do something else. Remember that? If you use beer drinking as a criteria, I wouldn't be standing here. Paula, you'll have somebody else speaking to this group. I almost failed. I couldn't be there because my math was so bad. I don't think every Chinese is good. My math was so bad, I almost couldn't get into college. Seriously. This is 1982 when I went to college in China. That's the last year the government said math will not count towards a total score if you major in English. So even though I studied English only for 2 years, my English was horrible, but it was better than math. So I said, okay, I choose that thing. I wish I could have said, I love America, I love English, but that's not the case. I tried to avoid math, so I picked English. But anyway, that's a strategy you can take. So if you use one criteria to judge, you basically lose on all those things. So this is the number one suggestion for schools. We have to return to the idea to say, create opportunities, cultivate, support individual strength. The other thing Americans need to add is this global citizenship things. Those new jobs, remember those translators, cultural consultants. Americans are horrible in teaching cultural intelligence. Those are, we still think, some people still think bilingualism is bad. I can't believe it. Anyone thinking people who speak 2 languages are worse than the monolingual? Some people have that belief. And I don't know why, I don't know how to tell them, but there's an interesting concept just being emerging I think, Paula, you probably are very aware of as leadership. Business schools in the US has been tracking a factor that determines those global executives, how successful they are. One of the factors they track is called cultural intelligence. Now they call it CQ. With high CQs and low CQs. It's a cultural intelligence, but that's different than knowledge of a country, a knowledge of a specific language. It is just this general ability to enable you to move across different cultures. And an indicator, they're trying to understand the factors. One of the factors is your opportunities of traveling abroad, of being interacting with other cultures, with other people. Obama actually is one of this, they call it a third country kid. A child who is born in a different country, moved around, like Obama is smart. Obama has a global perspective, you know. But if you grew up in, let's say, take any state randomly. If you are president, you randomly are born in Texas, you know. And if your only international experience is IHOP, you very hard have this. It's very hard to have this cultural intelligence. You have to have those things of knowledge of the globe. And let me actually move to the next slides to say it's understanding of global economics. I have an article you may be able to read that's coming out in September of education leadership, specifically talk about global competence. That is, we have to understand global economics, how our locally are affected by others so that we don't blame to say China's, the trade deficit is trouble. You know, today we don't understand a lot of this global economics. Therefore, we blindly blame other countries. We blame Mexico, blame NAFTA, blame China, blame India, and our politicians are happy to take advantage of that. You know why Michigan is still trying to consider this law? Hire Michigan first. Because those politicians don't understand this, how economics work. And they forgot, by the way, our governor, Jennifer Granholm, was born in Canada. If this law passed, we have to return her to Canada. Because we can't hire Michigan, right? That's going to be horrible. But anyway, global economics. When you are unhappy about those politicians, you have to blame yourself. Because they went through your schools, you didn't teach them well, as I said before. Abraham Lincoln once said, the philosophy of the government in next generation is the philosophy, actually the philosophy of the classroom in this generation will be the philosophy of the government in next generation. So we bear the responsibility to educate a public. Neil Postman said the same thing, actually. Public education does not serve the public. It creates a public. That is, public school bears responsibility to teach our children to understand global economics. Going back to Herbert Spencer, if our students are become members of a global community, they will have to develop ability to practice, to be a good member of the global community. And understand global problems too. Like global problems, how many of us we understand? The shortage of water in North Africa affects us a lot. It creates all the problems, the wars between Eritrea and Ethiopia and possibly affecting Egypt and Israel. The trees cutting down in the Amazon forest affects us, but we cannot tell the Brazilians, no, don't cut down the trees because we like good air and lower temperature. But those guys have the rights to develop as well, right? We cannot tell the Chinese or Indians, don't drive cars. We like cheap oil. We can't do that either. Now, these problems, how are we affected? Globalization shrink the globe and make us have to deal with them. Interdependence, I think I said enough about that. We cannot. In the 21st century, there's no culture can be like 300 years ago. Go out there and wipe off another culture. You know, before, people talk, we had earlier versions of globalization. That's true, but earlier version of globalization, most often it means one culture goes there, wipe you out, take over, run you as slaves. Today, it's very hard to do. Some people may try that, but it's very hard to go out there to say, I'll take you over, wipe you out, I'll make you my slave. Today, it's interdependent. We have to understand we have to become interconnected and interdependent with others. We can just not deal with others as humanize everybody else as others and humanize ourselves. We need to teach the humanizing process. But how do you do this? You have to, for example, in our language arts, literature courses, we should read a lot more literature about others. We should watch films. When we teach foreign languages, we should not treat it as a linguistic tour. Foreign language courses should be a cultural, psychological tour. It's a psychological journey into other people. Like Jiang Dewey once said, international travels can only strengthen your stereotypes unless you try to deal with these cultural conflicts. Unless you deal with this discomfort that brings because different cultures. We shield our children too much from cultural conflicts. We try to make them believe everything is harmonious when everything is not. I have developed a program called EGC, Education for Global Citizens. We start from kindergarten. We have about 6 schools now, 1 in China, 5 in Michigan. We call it bilingual, bicultural, and dual pedagogy. We build 2 schools, 2 cultures in the same school. We have a Chinese classroom, American classroom. We have a Chinese teacher teaching the Chinese curriculum in Chinese language, half day. And then the other half day, kids move to the American classroom, taking the American approach. We focus not on the language. We focus on the cultural experience and the pedagogy experience because we believe different educational systems have different strengths. Remember I was showing you the homework mom and the soccer mom because it means different cultural values. So through this experiment, we discovered children are into tolerance, are into appreciating other cultures. And it also helps our children gaining confidence in themselves. We have school actually in an inner city in Michigan. We're doing this. And we call AGC. We make children deliberately go through this very uncomfortable experience of moving across cultures. So, for example, the kids get confused a lot in the beginning. In the Chinese classroom, it's often group-oriented work. Kids are encouraged to read aloud, to chanting as a group. Mathematics, they learn good mathematics. When they go back to the American classroom, it's individualized, emerging curriculum. They're supposed to talk quietly. The kids don't get confused. Should I speak loud or should I speak, quietly? It's a very simple thing. Then gradually get used to this. We divide these 2 classrooms by physical space and time. So they spend a big chunk of time in one place, another big chunk of time in another place. It's really interesting. If you're interested, come to visit us. We start from kindergarten. Now we're into 2nd grade, into some schools now. Then the final thing, but what's valuable is digital competences. Today, our schools, when we come to technology, we think technology only as a tool to effectively teach traditional subjects. That's a mistake. I've done, as Paula was reading my bio, I've done research in teacher adoption of technology for the past 20-some years. And I can tell you, this is going to be very sad. Teachers are very hard to change. And technology, for the most part, has not proven to be able to improve the traditional subjects. Schools, however, has ignored what's important, the new digital literacy. That's the ability to be able to live in the digital world. Schools avoid this. Schools are forced to avoid this. We don't teach our kids to do this kind of stuff. You know why? Because we're afraid of being sued by parents. The internet by many schools has been reduced to large CD-ROM. Remember, we spend billions of dollars connecting to the internet. Now we're spending as much money blocking access to the internet. Right? This is actually very American. When I first arrived in America, I said people hire companies, fertilize their lawns. They only keep the grass growing green. The only reason they have to keep them grow is to cut them on Friday. Right? That's the same thing. We build the connection and we block the access to it. Now, how do we do this kind of stuff? So I have some suggestions for schools you can think about. The first thing you can imagine is to think about what's the foundation course. You have how much literacy, how much math we need. This big thing in schools, right? So can we really get rid of math and literacy? I don't think we can. Not yet. But I think schools have misread the data a lot. For example, we think literacy is a problem, illiteracy is a problem. Recently, there's a data released by the National Center for Educational Statistics about literacy, adult literacy. And it's showing, if you read the data, it's showing maybe about, 30% of Americans cannot read, illiterate. You heard of those data? So I went through the data myself. You find, if you are born in the US, if you went through American school systems, you are mostly literate. The illiteracy rates in adult basically are very high in new immigrants who have been here less than 5 years, didn't go through the system. So now, but we translate that literacy problem to schools. That's why we're spending so much time on reading first. We're spending so much time, so much money on trying to get kids to be able to read at first grade, second grade. And a lot of this reading had nothing to do with reading, has more to do with decoding, a lot with passing a test. So we have a very different way of thinking. Math is the same thing. If you take a look at the math problems, it's a very, very different issue than what we think we have. Like, for example, we argue, does everybody need 8th grade algebra? The whole country is trying to push for 8th grade algebra. Remember that? If you go through this, doesn't need. And you actually did see the increase of 8th grade algebra offered. But that doesn't mean everybody can do it. Doesn't mean everybody need it. I don't think my understanding has ever passed 8th grade algebra myself. But I still think I'm a decent human being. Without that, I think so, but Then what we need to do is a small foundation. We should move towards personalization. So personalized learning is a movement right now going out very strong in the UK. This is very much kind of with Jennifer Fox's idea of discovery of strength. And personalized, let's talk about education, is to tailor, like public services. We should go to fulfill every individual's personal potential. This is actually a government sponsor. Remember, UK under Thatcher has been moved once into this national curriculum. Now gradually, and especially recently, they have realized the detriment, the dangers of national curriculum. They're moving away from that. There are 2 reports came out. One is Cambridge report, one is Oxford report of the national curriculum movement in the UK. And basically, it's very negative, the results. So how do you get to do this? There's a David Hargreaves. It's not Andy Hargreaves. David Hargreaves give 9 gateways about how do you do personalized learning. And he says you can either start with curriculum. Increase choices to your curriculum. How many courses can you offer? How many different subjects can you offer? Today, with modern technology, you can do that. Many schools, for example, you may only be able to offer 1 foreign language or 2. But now with technology, with online learning, you can offer practical instruction in most languages. You can do that. Broaden your curriculum. I'm just going through some of the important ones. The school organization and redesign, structure changes. Can you change how your schools are structured? For example, right now, how schools are structured, there are 3 things we don't change. We haven't changed. Age cohort. We group kids because of age. The reason you're born in the same year is going to determine, you're placed in the same group in math and science and reading and art because you are 6th graders. Age, we don't change that part. The other thing we don't change is size. In our education, it's always about 25 kids or 30 kids with 1 adult. We never change that. We think that's why we have this big, futile debate about class size. But you all know, sometimes some knowledge can be passed on through 1 to 100. Sometimes you need 1 to 1. Sometimes you need 1 to 5. Class size is different. There are schools who are different. And the dean one I was just talking about one person, Jim Davis. Jim Davis is the principal of the Australian Math and Science School in Adelaide, Australia. If you go to his school, you'll find out. Sometimes you have a teacher lecture to the whole school about some topic. And sometimes they're working on a small cohort going out. And every student has a mentor once they enter the class, the school. So this is the second thing we don't normally change. Another thing we don't normally change, structure changes, is instructional time. We always talk about 45 minutes or 50 minutes. We know some activities require longer, some activities require shorter time. Actually, in England, some places have been trying this. Some they have offered 5-minute classes. They offer 3-day courses. They do this very differently. So can we imagine those 3 structural changes in our classes? Can we rethink about them? Can we group our students based on interest? For example, you get a bunch of students who are interested in become fashion designers. Can get them. By the way, Paula, our dean, Carol Ames, her son just featured as a fashion designer in Atlantic Monthly. I was talking to her. She said, when he was young, I always wanted him to do science. If he didn't finish science, he can do the design. He's dean of education from Michigan State. Now he's this big name, fashion designer. He just quit science study, went to, fashion design. So I'm just thinking about, can you, school organize those things in a different way? Now there's about student voice. This is something, just one last thing I want to mention about. Student voice is in the UK, it's going very strong. How do you encourage student voice? Students today have no say about what they learn in school. Actually, teachers have no say about what you teach. It's your government, right? But in some schools, in one thing, I was really impressed by this one school in England. They have this very little thing they do every day. When kids leave the school, they always ask them, are you happy today? They have this children happiness index, and they post on the web, actually on their school, kids vote, and teachers reflect on that. It's really interesting. Kids can see things get changed. Kids can have a design in this thing. So this is about personalized learning. How do you get that done? And then the second suggestion I have for this, you have to imagine your schools as global enterprises. Imagine your schools that you are not unknown, you're not a local entity, because you're preparing global products. Your students are becoming global. So therefore, as a global enterprise, simple suggestions is that you have to think of like global companies. You should draw on global resources. Your instructional resources can go beyond the national border or district border. One project I've been trying to do, I've actually been experimenting recently, is to bring Chinese language teachers from China and place them in American schools, because many schools do not have enough Mandarin teachers, and they want them. As I will bring them, I will train them, and I will give them to you very cheap. So we now have school districts in Illinois, in Tennessee, in Michigan, employing our teachers through my Confucius Institute. Because they're not certified in the beginning, so I said, I will create a program. You give me $40,000 a year to Michigan State University. We'll bring them in as visiting scholars, and they're going through a certification program in the Michigan State. While they're going through the process, they are your student teacher, but supervised by you. But they're offering the instruction right there. But when they finish this certification, you can hire them as your regular teachers. It's going very well, what's called global resource and global staffing. And we also offer a lot of online language courses. For example, I know you guys are talking IB. IB just contracted us to finish their first online IB Mandarin courses. That's going to be offered globally. We developed them, the Confucius Institute, and the people are going to take that. We have been offering online Mandarin courses to students in very different countries. We just finished the design of this game. I just finished part of it. It's called, I don't have time to show you, but it's a massively multiplayer online game to learn Mandarin Chinese. The idea is you get in this game, you interact with other players, and your job is to survive and thrive in China. If you use the language you learn to buy food, to make friends, check into your hotel. It's really interesting. You can find, I'll give you the web address. It's free right now. We got 20-some thousand users in there. Florida Virtual High School is thinking about offering this as full credit. Kids play the game, they complete the task, then they get credit. Because if you don't know the language or culture, you can't do this. So it's about really global staffing, global resourcing. Think beyond what you have. For example, if you want to offer, let's say, Japanese bonsai, I don't know what that is, but if this is something useful. If some kids want to take that course, I bet you can get online, get someone to teach that course for you for very little price. The Indians and Singaporeans are already offering math tutoring to American students already through tutoring companies. Why can't you think that way? And the other thing about, as global enterprise, global market. Public schools in the US have always served the local market. schools in other countries, actually, like Australia and England, have already begun to serve the global market. They bring international students from Thailand, South Korea, enroll them in public schools. Both brings revenue and globalize their campus. So I'm thinking about it here. When you have a budget problem, why can't you be like universities, bring international students? A lot, because American school system, despite some people think American public schools suck, but they're actually good. Many people still think they love to come here. So why can't you open us as a global market, serve the global market? Then about technology. Something has to do with technology to help you as well. Remember technology? I learned this one thing. I love this thing. Never send a man to do a machine's job. You guys know watching The Matrix, right? Okay, so remember this. Why I say this? It has to do with this study. Remember I was telling you? Using technology to improve the instruction of traditional subjects did not work. The $10 million study from the Congress, this was from Mathematica, 2 years ago, shows there's no significant difference between schools use software and not use software. So people were really mad about this then. For example, News Education Week, the media says, technology is no use. They make an argument, all this stuff. And of course, other people who are studying the software says, technology is useful, the study is flawed. But really, why are we unhappy about this? It's because of this thing. We used to have a teacher, now we have plus a computer, right? We think that should achieve more. But now the result is the same. Basically, the result is what happens. We don't like it. We don't like the investment. Well, the problem is the teacher is already doing great without a machine. The machine actually interferes in this process if used for the same thing. What we need to think is like this. What if a computer can do as well as a human teacher? Would we be happy? Could, right? Well, you won't be happy, but somebody else will be happy. The issue is that a lot of things in our schools can be done more effectively by computers. Our job as instructional leaders, as school principal, is to delineate what's better be done by machines, what's better be done by human beings. We should not send our teachers to do the machine's job. For example, what can be done by machines? The basic math fluency. That's important. Basic phonemic awareness, basic reading skills, those things. Remember, in industry, we already allow automation to do things. That's left brain. Teachers should do something that machines cannot do. Teachers should do something that human beings do best, the right brain kind of skills, right brain talents. So here are some suggestions for you to consider. I give some examples. In the classroom, what I found most impressive technology is personal response systems. Do you know what those things are? It's like TV clicker. We call them clickers. There are a lot of them. They're very cheap, very simple, but if used well, it can do a lot of things teachers cannot do. For example, I have 25 kids in the classroom. You don't know. It's very hard to know if they memorize something, right? But if with this clicker, you get that very quickly. If you have mechanical multiple choice tests, you can do that very quickly. Remember, as teachers, I used to be a teacher. I'm still a teacher, but now I used to grade a lot of the same items. When I taught English in China, I'm doing the same thing. But with this, it will be much faster to check fact-checking, right? With this, so it's doing something that teachers do not want to and cannot do. So I like it much better than some other things. And at a school level, as I was, this example, I have to give this example. This is from actually China. I was involved in designing this. This should give you some ideas about how do you think about technology. This project was done by the Chinese Ministry of Education, try to transform English language instruction in China. So the English language instruction was, in college, everybody's required to take an English course. but do not have enough teachers. So what ends up is one teacher teaches 70 to 100 students. Most people take naps in those classrooms. They don't, because it's not useful, language learning. So the Ministry of Education said, we got to change that. So what we changed, we said, okay, I took the idea about never send a man to the machine's job. You analyze the process of learning a foreign language. You know, there are some things in this process that can be done by machines better than human beings. For example, exposure. We know learning a foreign language, you have to be exposed to rich materials, cultural and language materials. A teacher is hard to do that. No matter how good you are an entertainer, you cannot present a whole sitcom to the students. So we said, let's take that part. So we take a video, we chop the video, we allow the students individually to watch the video on their own. But also in this process of watching the video, we know control is important. The students be able to control the speed of the video, how many times they play, individualization. We cannot do that to a teacher, right? So now with the privacy, students can control, make it slow, make it fast, and memorize the words, and connect to grammar, explanation, individual feedback, and all this mechanical exercise, access to materials can be done better than machines. So what we did, we said, okay, we'll do online modules, 1 to 2 hours. Students have to master this vocabulary, read this, practice the pronunciation, using speech technology to correct them. And after that, they have a CD-ROM they can take home to listen. And then they can get to 2 to 4 hours, move out with 1 hour of teacher-led small group discussion. It's a massive system. So only students who have passed assessment, have done all this work, can sign up with the clinic work, but with 10 students, with 1 teacher. So the human teacher is doing socializing, which machines cannot do, answering some questions, putting the language into real use, you cannot do. So you segment this process. And that's how you can do this in your math work. That's why I said technology is not a teacher's problem, it's a school leader's problem. School has to rethink about how do you redeploy technology in a different way. Teachers have too few degrees of freedom to make the change. Because you're controlled, you cannot change this. So school leaders have to take the responsibility, but also that large, what I call this system level. I was mentioning online Chinese courses. I already mentioned this. We're doing very massive. You take courses, and Florida Virtual University is an example, Michigan Virtual University is an example, IB is an example. You basically think about your schools. Imagine to personalize the learning, to meet the needs of every student. You have to redesign the use of technology. That is to allow machines to do certain things. Do not have machines do the same thing as human beings do. You know, actually in our schools, we look really funny right now, silly in many ways. We have a computer here, a teacher here, we have them do the same thing. It's like the same thing. It's like you have someone standing by the ATM machine, put your card in, get your money out. That's a bank teller, right? You would think that's funny, right? But actually that happens in some other places. In China, you have a lot of those new communities. You have gated communities. You go there, you're supposed to put a card, get the gate open, but now it's some person standing there. You give the card to the person push the thing and open the gate for you. In schools, our technology and teachers is very much like that. There's no saving, there's no differentiation of functions, but we should think technology in a very different way. And the final suggestion, which is more policy related, you know, we cannot escape accountability. Accountability is there, but now, right now, the rhetoric of accountability in the US is basically saying that we do not trust you. That's the basic message. That is, if we squeeze you harder, you'll work harder. That's the idea, right? Like merit pay, for example, it's a really stupid idea. How do you, like recently, Artie Duncan says, merit pay connected to test scores, right? If teachers are paid a decent salary, so you do not really humiliate or embarrass them, the merit pay doesn't really change a lot of things. China has been doing this. Many countries have been doing this. Actually, this is not a research. It doesn't really change hugely. I know San Diego has been trying some of this stuff. The problem with all this outcome-based accountability is that it's assuming teachers control the whole process. It's assuming that individual differences at home background, cognitive ability don't matter at all. We can change everything. It's assuming, and also it's assuming that teachers are all complacent and lazy. It's certainly assuming that. So you are all going to be incentivized by external factors. I don't think that's actually the way it works, but people like to think that way. So what we need to move is what I call input-based accountability. We need to look at, are schools all equally funded? You know, if anything called national standards, I would like to have a national standard of school funding. I think every school should be funded equally as a national thing. That's what happened in Finland. Not curriculum standardization, but are we providing the basic facilities? The same way, right? We should hold the legislators much more accountable for that way, to say, are we equally funding our places? That's much more important. You know, the huge inequality in funding is amazing. Learning facilities. But schools, do you have individualized learning space? Do you have spaces for stimulating creative projects? You know, I would go examine the learning facilities. Have a different set of criteria based on idea about diversity, about leadership. Do you have a leadership that's visionary? Do you have a leadership that can dream, can be different? Do you have a leadership that can be and dare to provide and produce unique opportunities for students? Do you have an inspiring leadership? And teacher quality, this is the same thing about teacher quality. You know, we talk about teacher quality all the time, but now with teacher quality should not only be about individual qualification, should also be about empathy. Do they work together? Do they socialize with each other? That's a different way of assessing. It's not, American teacher preparation has always been like this, what I call this Western spaghetti movie, John Wayne type stuff, right? We're trying to prepare individual heroes, but ignoring that actually teaching is very much about teamwork. You do not have to have John Waynes in your school, all of them to be Waynes. Some of them can be very, green teachers. Actually, this is a system. If I was doing analyze some data of TIMSS data, years of teaching experience should matter in some ways, right? So I analyzed data. It mattered a lot more in the US and Canada when teachers are treated as individuals. And the years of teaching experience did not matter at all in Hong Kong, Singapore, and South Korea, because where teaching is considered as a group work. So about teacher quality, you have to think about how do you get them to work together as a team. And student voice, do you have mechanisms to encourage students to bring their voices up, to be serious about redesigning their own learning space and curriculum? And do you have diverse opportunities for different ways? How many after-school clubs do you have? Just simple example, do you have clubs for them to explore different abilities and talents? Do you encourage that? And tolerance, I want to make it more active. Not only about being able to put up with others, but actually encourage others to speak up. Today we are still very much segregated. The segregation has to do with we're not tolerant of others. Because we try to impose judgment on other people as lesser of a human being. But tolerance has to do with talents. If today's national policy of only testing math and reading and science, to me, is intolerance of other subjects. Is what I call academic imperialism, right? Is we think others have no value, no other subjects, other talents are not useful. I call them talent cleansing. It's like, people cleanse other talents. We should have this pure three things. That's valuable. And finally, is your school connected globally? Are you engage your students in global activities, interactions? You may not be able to afford to global travels, but are you interacting with students, with people, with teachers from other places? So what I call this input-based accountability measures. I would measure distance, not on other factors which you may not have much control. I would measure efforts, not outcomes which may be influenced by other factors. So I've lectured you for all this 2.5 hours. I think now it's time for you to ask me some questions, some discussions before I leave. Thank you. Yes, please.
We were talking at the break about Friedman's competitive model versus a collaborative model. Could you share with the audience about how we don't need to motivate out of fear? And that's kind of what his book is about, that America needs to be number one, and we're not going to take the Indians and the Chinese with us, we're going to beat them. Could you speak to that?
Well, I think that's, like you said, that's a general American psyche. We need our enemies. Actually, around the collapse of the Soviet Union, around 1989, one of Gorbachev's aide told Ronald Reagan, he said, "We're doing a horrible thing to you Americans. We're depriving you of an enemy." Because they collapsed, we're collapsing. It's really interesting. But Americans was quickly found new enemies. It's no big problem. They can always find enemies, you know. We can have this and that. The policy, people, all these gaps I described is exactly what you see. Fear has been used as a major policy device in the US. And once you're in fear, you surrender everything. I mean, that's what we do. That's now today, actually in my book, chapter 2 is specifically talking about how we have surrendered our so much education freedom because we are fearful of other countries. And Friedman just goes into that. I think the issue has to do with this is if we think the globe not as competition, but as complementing each other. Remember those maps of diversity? Yes, we need each other. We need others to support this. You know, for example, in Michigan, I sometimes pose the question, do you really want those labor-intensive, high-pollution jobs here? They say no. You know, but they look at something different. That's because it's motivating in a different way. It's people. It's almost kind of natural. We have to have this global supply chain. We have to be on this together. That's why I said our schools, we have to teach our children about interdependence, about global economics, about the so-called trade deficit issues, those things. I think our schools, I don't know about in California, at least in Michigan, the social studies textbooks don't cover any of those things. When they come to globalization, they talk about two things. Shoes from China and jobs to Mexico. That's our textbooks. Serious, I was going through my children's social studies. But we need to teach a lot more about the global interdependence, is how we're affected by others and how we affect others. But that's very hard to teach. As an American psyche, I hope some schools here, especially San Diego, we should do a better job with this thing. We should not view others as demonize them. You know, basically we have visioned the Chinese and Indians as thieves of American jobs. We used to give that title to the Mexicans. And now that's going to shift to somebody else in the future. But we have to think about, without those thieves, without the job thieves, would America be as prosperous today? Actually, won't be. If you look at the other statistics, very different. So we need to give the truth back to our schools, to our students. Other questions or comments? Yes, please.
Thanks for a great presentation and great ideas. You are talking about some very compelling vision and very compelling ideas. You're really talking about transformation of educational delivery. And I'm wondering if you think it can be done under the current structure of education in our country, because we've all got kids now, and it's only possible to make, I think, incremental change in education in the structural environment that we exist in today. To make the wholesale kinds of changes, to really rethink every step of educational delivery, what, in your opinion, can we do? Are we stuck with incremental change, or can we really have a transformative kind of dialogue? It's a whole innovative leadership. So I'm curious as to if you were to advise us as all, kind of evangelists for some kind of transformation in education, what would you suggest we do? And can we affect more than incremental change?
Well, thank you. I think the first thing we have to stop in this country is the current trend towards standardization. That's a national policy issue, and that can be changed. It looks very, very hard to change. You look at the media, the politicians that seem to all for this accountability and standards. And standards actually should, if you have a chance, watch a video. You can search for me debating with Bill Schmidt, a good friend of mine. He's very for national standards. He worked on the National Governors Associations. And I mean, apparently, again, I think he lost. He thought he didn't lose. He was as good as I was, but he didn't say he won either. So just watch that. The national standards doesn't solve the problem, but I think that's something we have to stop. And to stop that is very hard because over the past several decades, American public school educators and public schools have been basically discredited. To say, as you are basic whiners, you resist this and resist that, but we have to stop this somehow. And there is some new movement coming out. People are start resisting general testing. Testing is, according to the new PDK Gallup poll, people start to believe less of the testing now. The second thing I think has to do with local school leaders. I think it's possible to make big transformative changes now. And these transformative changes, the reason I say that, the conditions are ripe. The technology products, technology ways of using of technology is there. It's been tried in different places. And the views about project-based learning, cross-disciplinary, these have been tested in some schools. There are schools that have been doing this. But what it needs a convincing and a courageous leadership in schools. School leaders have to take the responsibility to transform. We cannot just only be implementers of national policy. We have to become protectors of our children's future. And a lot of times we don't protect our children enough. We just say, we become this complaint about, oh, I can't do anything. But I have seen seriously big, good, bold moves taken by local school leaders. And I've met a lot of them. Unfortunately, most of them are in other countries, not in this country. I have seen really, really courageous people transform schools and school systems. So it can be done. The technology is there. If, like they say, San Diego Unified, for example, if you're ready to change, I bet you can, within a week, Paula or someone else can deliver you a group of people who help you devise a plan that's realistic, that won't cost more, but will deliver a different vision of education. Yes?
Young, I have to respond because I want to make some connections here. Your metaphor of schools as global enterprises is so powerful. Because really, John Goodlad said you've got to take one school at a time for transformation. I can't wait for the governor. I can't wait for Arnie Duncan. And we have in this room, and the people who come to this, that I work with in this institution, we have all the potential to change, to turn those schools into global enterprises. And this week, what's been so powerful for me to hear and talking with all of you, the global resources, we've talked about all those global resources and how we can bring them into schools. The global products, the same thing. The global staffing examples that you give, and the work that Young is doing at Michigan State. I watch his Confucius Institute. I think your Confucius Institute is the best one in the world.
Thank you.
Okay? I mean, and they're all over the world, by the way. But the incredible amount of materials that they are developing that are available to people who want to learn about Chinese language and culture. So those resources are all there. And so if we look at our schools, and then we were talking about niches and how each of your schools have a different focus, a different niche. That's one of the strengths of a charter school. I mean, look at the high-tech high and the kids you were talking to the other day and the PBL. If you don't want to do PBL, fine. There are other teaching techniques. When I look at my university, how are we different from all these other institutions? Every student in this school has to have an international experience in order to graduate. Every student in this school goes through action research. Every student in this school has project-based learning. So that is how I'm differentiating from the 27 other programs available in San Diego County that offer teacher education.
Exactly, thank you. Very powerful, yes.
I'd just like to make a comment as somebody who's kind of entering this new, bigger thinking of education as I'm entering into the administrative world here. I appreciate your new perspectives on some of this old data that's kind of been beaten into some teachers' mentalities. It's enlightening, it's very empowering. And you know those little 5-hour energy drinks? Well, you're like my 10-year energy drink.
Thank you.
You've given me just so much to just think about and so much to bring in, when I get there, be a side paper. I appreciate that.
Thank you. If you get a chance to get the book, there's a lot of data in there, because today I wasn't able to dive into the data. I know because the other side of the story always brings data to say how bad we are. But if you go to my book, you will see other types of data or different reinterpretation of the data in a much more meaningful way. And specifically, I have a chapter focused on China, why China is not a threat, as it yet in this. So I document how the pros contrasting systems. It's if you get a chance, because I know a lot of school boards today are influenced by this. But fortunately, I can tell you, I have been invited already, perhaps by 20 of the 50-some state school board association to speak in the last year and next 2 years. So I'll be speaking to a lot of school board members about this issue, because they face the same, they want to judge. I think our biggest problem is how to define success. In essence, the criterion of success. What's good education? Unfortunately, the current rhetoric is that we have mistaken test scores as the indicator of quality of education. That's our problem. Because of that reason, we have hurt more. No child left behind, hurt more of underprivileged kids. The kids who we think they cannot read and write are deprived of opportunities to engage in things that may really matter. When inner city kids are deprived of art, music, recess, and sports to do literacy, the suburban kids, they're studying foreign languages, they're traveling abroad, they engage in next wave of what matters. So that's something I think we need to be very careful. You are here ready to protect them. Hopefully, you will still preserve their dream and passion, not just to tell them you are so bad. You are again, you rank at I don't know about 23 percentile or 75 percentile. We shouldn't do that. Schools, students, teachers should not be judged by one single criteria. Yes, please.
What is your vision for a new form of testing for students?
I don't like testing at all. No, I think we should have assessment, but assessment should be, this is not me talking, all I'm talking, it should be authentic, performance-based, natural, and measures progress, not measures a national normed outcome. We have this national norm to say, oh, this means certain 50% percentile. Data-driven. Data can be so wrong. Okay? Data-driven can be so mistaken. Let me give you an example. This example has been played out many, many places. Assessment. Wait time in emergency rooms is a good idea, right? Now, we should say, nobody should wait in the emergency room for more than 5 hours. So New York was trying to say, okay, we should reduce that. We will reward those emergency rooms, hospitals, who can shorten the wait time of between you arrive and being treated by the doctor. New York quickly, yes, the wait time has disappeared, declined a lot. But then gradually they found out there are more and more ambulances parked outside on the street. So they're just not delivering this patient into the ER, but then they're just outside. That's what we call massive cheating. This actually was discovered recently in England. Now they have the ambulance driving, not arriving at the patient's home. So they're driving in circles 4 hours before they arrive there, and then they will take them. Because UK was counting the time you went to the home and count the time you delivered this. But so they just don't arrive. So this is what a lot of data can be manipulated. This is called Campbell's law. Campbell's law is Donald Campbell, a psychometrician, basically said, if you apply any quantitative measures to any social course and try to monitor it based on that, it's going to lead to corruption. So assessment, if we try to use assessment, the higher the stake you apply to testing, the worse the situation will be. In China now, people risk being imprisoned to cheat on the high college entrance test exam. There's all kinds of high-tech devices invented. The criminal groups actually being formed. They do that in China right now. So because the stakes are so high, you do anything. So testing, I encourage low-stakes testing. I encourage authentic, formative, progress measured based on students, not do national norms. I do not want you to say, okay, oh, I am 37 percentile, therefore I'm better than 37% of the kids. education in the US, we can afford this right now, is not about selection, it's about educating. We don't have to select until much later. Yes, please.
But to follow up on that, now if we have the students in the U.S. who are competing with the students in China, the students in India who are coming out of a system where there's standardized or normed assessments, how are these students going to be able to compete if they are not also performing at this high level of standardized testing? It seems to me that maybe you have to have a balance between both.
Well, first of all, you're not competing over test scores. The Chinese and Indians may have a good test score, but what they will lose is other abilities. You're not competing test scores. Your test scores itself is not what we're competing over. That's number one. Number two, in order to get those test scores, you sacrifice. Every education, every opportunity has cost. You are doing this, you will lose other things. That's why I talk about educational ecosystem. The Chinese and Indians may be doing this test scores to this, but they maybe lose other abilities. And also, I have to say this, when we talk about the Chinese, the Indians, China is huge, India is huge. They are American systems. What I want to go back to is individuals. For example, individuals in China may not enjoy the science museums, the talent shows. Therefore, those creative people may have been driven away. That's it. So our competition, we will never be able to compete in terms of test scores. We shouldn't be competing test scores. Why should we do that? That's the idea. It's not about, maybe we should have this, maybe we should have that. I think that's a lot of people say, oh, we can have both standards. Actually, I had a chance to debate Achieve, Mike Cohen too. Maybe we can have standards without sacrifice. I said, no. That's a good wishful thinking. We can have standards, but once we have standards, we will go after standards so fiercely that we will sacrifice other things. It's just reality. The idea is, of course, we should have everything, but the reality is that we can't. So what I would say, the Chinese and Indians, they may score well, but there will be other abilities that we can't measure that may matter some more that they will lose. That's like, there's a lot of data showing that. So what I would say is that, first of all, we should not privilege certain subjects as their most valuable knowledge, as we do not. We basically value two things in elementary school, reading and math, right? We should not overly value that. And I think once you have this foundation, you can make other things up. No, if you lose the passion, the courage, and the belief in yourself at a young age, you'll lose later on as well. So that's something we should not overprivilege. Another thing, we should not privilege. We should not just privilege one type of thinking over the other. I think it's about diversity. The whole talk about globalization, about technology, is really basically saying that every little strange idea, every little person as strange, as freaky as Madonna can be valuable. That's the idea. We should not basically try to say, this is the way to do it. Because we cannot predict what profession will be there. There was a reporter from the Forbes tried to talk to me and said, because the business roundtable is trying to say, schools should prepare kids to a profession they can project. I said, no, you can't project that. The advantages of countries come and go. The discovery of new energy sources can quickly end the privilege of Middle East. I was actually in Abu Dhabi. I told them, I said, you guys should, because they are worried about their boys don't learn. Because the boys inherit big money from the Emirates. And I was telling these boys, the teacher, I said, you guys have to know, the Stone Age did not end because they ran out of stones. It's not because of that. It's because they have discovered other technologies. The oil age doesn't have to end because the oil runs out. It's because other things come up. So advantages change. So what we have to prepare is get people to be curious, passionate, try to be creative, and try to be different. Only diversity of talents can sustain an economy, a country, a civilization. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Dr. Zhao, I know I am speaking on behalf of everybody in this room. We are thrilled that you were able to join us. you so much.
Thank you. And those are the websites I mentioned, Confucius Institute and the game. Okay.